Good morning and welcome to the meeting of the Policy Committee. I'm Pat Kemp here, and we'll start this morning calling the meeting to order and do a Pledge of Allegiance. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and this morning we'll do, the first thing we can do is a roll call, please.
Commissioner Kemp?
Here.
Commissioner Cohen?
Here.
Commissioner Smith?
Here.
Councilman Maniscalco? Here. Commissioner Overman?
Here.
Charles Klug? Here. We do have an in-person quorum. Chair, would you please call for a consent vote for remote participation?
Yes, and if we could have a consent. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And we have one member joining us remotely. And we have one person signed for public comment, I understand, Mr. Ron Weaver. Oh, you're here in person.
Thank you very much this morning, and I would look forward to hearing, if I may. I'm Ron Weaver, 401 East Jackson Street, and I was just curious if this body had heard anything about how the Legislative Budget Committee might be dealing by September 1 with those first $582 million worth of collections from the sales tax. If you've heard anything on how that's coming for September 1 and how holistically we're going to be able to hopefully have those monies put to the right directions for roads and buses and preparation for rail, and that none of those be left out holistically with respect to the destination. Any progress that has been made or that can be made with respect to the wise disposition of those $562 million collected to be disposed of by the State Legislative Budget Committee by September 1.
And thank you for commenting. I'm sure we all feel the same way, but I was going to ask you the same question. And I don't think
relatively quiet.
I don't think there's anyone. I don't think there's anyone at this time. It's unusual for me to put in, but I think we're all extraordinarily concerned. We appreciate your comments, and we'll be watching closely. And as soon as anyone finds out, I'm sure it's going to come to the attention of this body, the TPO, or the Hillsborough County BOCC. So
thank you.
We will keep you posted, and thank you for
thank you. Your citizens really
interest.
appreciates that vigilance. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And we will now call for approval of the minutes.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second for the minutes, and hearing no further comment, can we do a vote of approval? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, hearing no opposition, then we have passed the minutes. And we will move to the main action items at this point. The storm evacuation and shelter in place study report. Allison Yeh.
That's fine. Good morning. Allison Yeh. I'm TPO staff and project manager for this study. So the main goal of this study was to really look at strategies that could help us reduce the evacuation times in Hillsborough County, and look at strategies that would not involve road widenings. And we also looked at some hot spots for evacuation congestion during storms. The idea was to supplement the great work that's already being done by Hillsborough County Emergency Management and Tampa Emergency Management, and really want to thank them because they gave us feedback and assistance throughout the project. I also wanted to acknowledge that Tampa and Hillsborough planners, the school district, Hart, and Sunshine Line were really generous in sharing their technical expertise with us. What I'd like to do this morning briefly is have our technical consultant, she's online with us from Cambridge Systematics, Karen Kisleski. She's going to go over our findings and talk about our recommendations, and really look forward to your feedback after that. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Karen, you're muted.
Now can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I had to call in by phone, so. Thank you all for having me this morning to talk about this study. Cambridge Systematics and Quest, we're very excited to be able to support the TPO in this effort. As Allison laid out, the purpose of the study, today, if you'll move to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about some context. I at least think someone else is controlling the slides. Yes, thank you. I'll talk a little bit more about the study purpose, but more from a background and context perspective. We'll talk about the topics that we investigated in more in depth related to hurricane evacuation and sheltering in place, some of the outreach that was done, as well as the recommendations, particularly the recommendations for the TPO. So for the next slide, just to give you some background, in case you were not aware, this is an evacuation zone map for Hillsborough County. There are 5 evacuation zones. They relatively relate to the hurricane categories 1 through 5. Evacuation zones are designed to protect people from storm surge, for the most part, which is why they are along the coast. So you may have heard the phrase flee from flood and hide from wind. So that's the thinking in terms of evacuation due to flood. Mobile homes are a wind-related exception to this. So all mobile homes and people living in mobile homes or recreational vehicles are requested to evacuate for all zones. That's starting with the lowest level at a Category 1 as well. So this map, like I said, shows the Category 1, which is the red, all the way through to the 5, kind of going inland, and then it shows where the shelters are, both the general purpose shelters and pet shelters, seeing as pet shelters are becoming much more important to people going forward. Next slide, please. So for a Category 3 storm, which is a hurricane evacuation zone C, the population in that zone is about 500,000, which is roughly a third of the county would be requested to evacuate. Just to give you some context as to why it's so important to kind of think of ways of addressing evacuation and sheltering. And we talk about clearance times when it comes to hurricane evacuation, and the clearance time is the time it takes from when an evacuation notice is given to the time for all people that are evacuating to reach a safe destination or shelter. And so for a Zone C or a Category 3, that is 24 hours. The models project that it would take 24 hours for people to evacuate. And that's about the time we typically get for an evacuation warning. So just to let you know what the study then did is we did look at some high-level analysis of techniques. We did some evacuation modeling, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We emphasized on options that were not road widening to be able to support evacuation, and then also focused on TPO implementable actions, although you'll see I'll talk about communications as well. Next slide. So the topics in particular that were looked at came about through discussions with the stakeholders that Allison mentioned up front, the municipalities and the emergency management, as well as outreach to the public in terms of areas they felt were important to be addressed related to transportation and evacuation and sheltering. So they covered traffic congestion, both hotspot and operations. I'll go in a little bit more detail about these in a little bit. Same thing with transit and paratransit in terms of what that means. And then people also felt that there is a lot of communication out there on some things and not so much on others, as did some of the emergency managers who, also talk about the need to be able to get communications out. So I'll talk a little bit about both message conveyance as well as content. So for next slide, we did do a technical analysis of evacuation hotspot locations. This information, this map that you're seeing here was done based on looking at the historical data from Hurricane Irma, the evacuations over that week, essentially, of people moving throughout Florida, as well as some of the information from the TPO's own long-range transportation plan in terms of where congestion might occur. This reflects the top areas. There are other areas that are also congested, but is not to be surprised when it comes to the freeways I-74 and I-75, and I-4 seem to pop to the top. And this relates to and coordinates with some of the projects that FDOT is continuing to look at in terms of managed lanes for those facilities. And then on the arterials, some of these were areas close to interchanges with the interstates. To be expected, as people try to go longer distances, they will try to go to the interstates first. But there also were some within the community, like Bruce B. Downs and Dale Mabry, as well as the airport at George J. Bean Parkway. So these are some of the areas that we've been looking at in terms of some strategic suggestions of how to address them. Going forward. And then for traffic operations, some of the ideas that are suggestions that are out there is traffic signal coordination, similar to other major events, making sure that the travel flows in an evacuation direction, and while also allowing access for neighborhoods, people to get out of neighborhoods. Something to be considered. They can be set up ahead of time to be implemented as needed. Addressing circuitous routes, we've heard from some community groups in terms of how to get out of some larger master plan communities, for example. Those are context specific in terms of recommendations we would have for there. Sometimes it's wayfinding within the neighborhoods. Other times it could be just identification that moving throughout of alternate ways to move through those neighborhoods. Phased evacuation is another operation consideration. You may have heard this in Monroe County when they ask visitors to leave early from the Keys. That's what is going on there, trying to get a segment of the population to leave earlier than others. This one is one where emergency managers are cautious about using just because we know of the uncertainty related to some of the storm direction. Emergency shoulder use, this is for the interstate. This is what is replacing contraflow. Contraflow is where you would turn both the northbound and southbound in one direction, presumably northbound on I-75 as an example. That requires a lot of resources to be able to close those interchanges and move it that way, and also inhibits preparing for recovery and response. So the new approach has been to use emergency shoulders, and this is where typically the inside shoulder of the interstate is open for travel during an evacuation. I-75 and I-4 have been designated for this, and FDOT looks and evaluates the list of areas annually and takes steps to make sure that they're adequate to be able to support that kind of shoulder use. And then, of course, reversible lanes. You all are familiar with that with the Selman Expressway. This would be a situation where they would potentially stay eastbound during an evacuation instead of switching day and night. Next slide. And then we also did some transit and paratransit evaluation. We had some good conversations with HART and Sunshine Line and the school board at the beginning. They all have an important role to play during evacuation. HART reconfigures its bus service. The past few years, it has reconfigured its bus service as needed to be able to support they call an emergency service, that it works to evacuate those evacuation zones. Sunshine Line then addresses people with medical needs. That requires a registration system, which is important for people to be aware of. And then the school board pitches in and helps when it can, to the extent it can, in terms of directed pickups and things like that. So there's been a lot of questions about, should the service go into emergency service, or should it stay in its typical service for HART, just so that because residents are very familiar with the standard routes. And so we, to provide some support for those agencies, we kind of did a quick analysis or short analysis of how much coverage there is of people in households with below poverty income for those different service characteristics. So I'll start with the bottom row, as it's the easiest to explain. There's about 73,474 households below the poverty line. In a traditional heart service, 63% of those households are covered within a half a mile. People can get to a heart route. In the emergency service, only 31% can reach a heart service. And this is mostly because it constricts to move west. So households in the further east do not have access to it, which if you're looking at a sheltering-in-place solution may be something to consider and try to be able to allow them to continue to have service. I'll go up to Category 3 because this is now the opposite. For those the households affected there, 71% would be covered by a typical heart service, but in an emergency service mode, 76% of those households do have access to the emergency service and would be able to use that service to evacuate. That in these emergency routes, HART takes people to the shelters, to shelter locations so that they can shelter there. And it is provided both at stops and in a kind of a flag down service in terms of people can let the bus driver know that they need to be picked up. Next slide. So switching from transportation to communication, I had mentioned we did some evacuation modeling. Evacuation modeling is what is used to help identify those clearance times I talked about, as well as to whether new or changed evacuation routes are needed. We looked at we were able to model 3 different scenarios. One was for the hot spots where we made some minor infrastructure changes there. The second one was for emergency shoulder use. And then a third scenario was where people reacted more quickly to an evacuation order, which we tied to the communication scenario. And it was actually in this communication scenario where we saw some changes in the clearance time. The other 2 times did not see a difference in evacuation clearance time associated with them. And that's mostly because they tended to be interstate focused. And as more capacity was provided to the interstate, the speculation is that it was then used by travelers getting to the interstate, on the interstate, and potentially freeing up some of the local roads. So for communications, 3 areas we looked at from a capital perspective, providing more dynamic message signs, help with that messaging concern that was raised. These could be on arterials, it could be at the neighborhoods. It could be, we were thinking mostly permanent, but there's an opportunity for portable signs as well, as long as they could be made safe. Some targeting messaging, kind of now moving to the content versus the conveyance, especially related to transportation. I mentioned Sunshine Line goes into a registration mode for people to be picked up and taken to the shelter. So making that kind of information known would be important. And then ongoing collaboration and coordination was key. There's the emergency managers, they're very focused on what it takes to keep people safe. They need all the help and support they can get from their sister agencies. So the TPO providing that kind of coordination and augmenting their education functions would be appropriate. We also noticed that people were looking for a one-stop shop to find information. And Hillsborough County does have its Stay Safe website, which is shown down here, and it provides all the different ways to prepare, where to evacuate, where the shelters are, and things like that. The Florida Department of Economic Opportunity also has one as well, as does the Division of Emergency Management. So lots of places out there to be able to get information. Next slide. I'm almost done, I promise. In terms of public and partner outreach, we did have several different avenues for working with the public. Allison mentioned the partners, and I mentioned the partners. We did have an online open house with some surveys. We prepared some videos that were included on the study website. Social media indicated when the open houses would be, as well as providing links to the surveys. And TPO staff actually participated in community meetings to get information out, as well as to seek feedback on the solutions being discussed. The next slide, when it comes to recommendations, I have has tiered these both for transportation and then communications, and then the final one is next steps, particularly for the TPO, into transportation, addressing the evacuation hotspots would help alleviate those concerns and keep accidents and crashes to a minimum. Improve the travel flow. This is through operational items that I mentioned previously. Providing the message signs would be another one. And then, of course, reviewing the paratransit operations and supporting the agencies as they kind of revisit those operations if and when they choose. And then from a communications, the next recommendation, next slide, is, just to help inform emergency managers are the ones that set those messages up, but they can use assistance in terms of encouraging people to shelter in place, evacuate shorter distances so that there's less people on the road, which will help regional evacuation. Targeting messages appropriately for particular groups, as I mentioned, and assisting with, in particular, for people that do not have access to the internet, to our smartphone. Those in particular are those with medical needs, making sure that they know ahead of time what they need to do to prepare, and then are set to be able to evacuate or stay in place as appropriate. And then, of course, to support the local agencies with emergency management or with some housing programs in that. I mentioned WIN previously in terms of mobile homes. There are not a lot of agencies out there that have recommendations specifically for when someone in a home should evacuate. They rely on the Saffir-Simpson WIN scale that is out there, but there are a lot of local governments and agencies that do have housing enhancement programs, weatherization programs, whether it's like a PACE program for roofs and windows or some other programs that are out there. The next steps for the TPO would be to include this information in the long-range transportation plan and the congestion management process, or in the TIP as a box one, coordinate with the transit agencies, and then potentially look to continue the coordination through on emergencies and evacuation and sheltering through a collaborative initiative. So with that, I think we're ready for questions and answers.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think that Commissioner Overman has some comments or questions.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation. Planning for emergencies has now become my second job, apparently, so I'm very aware of how this works. Some of the things that have popped up in questions in the past were, as you mentioned, is the environmental justice areas. In those areas, frequently we have housing stock that's at risk of wind damage. That's not really considered in this process from what I could tell. It is when it comes to mobile homes, but maybe not necessarily in the areas that we've studied in the past with the ages of homes that would put people at risk for evacuation. So that was one thing I wanted to kind of see. If we were to look at that map along with mobile homes, how would that impact the number of shelters available and what the patterning might look like? But that being said, I'm observing on the page that shows where the zones are and then where the shelters are. And there, in my questioning is, it doesn't seem to indicate that 75 would be the issue. I'm going to ask Commissioner Cohen, for the folks that live in South Tampa, it appears as though the only 3 shelters that are available that are close to get to are the ones that are in East Tampa where HART serves for bus transit. So I'm curious in looking about where we put shelters, the area with the highest amount of evacuation has the least amount of shelters. Is that a part of our process to identify how those individuals move? Because that is concerning. We have a lot of folks in South County along the shore that have the choice of going on the multiple shelters that are on Fishhawk Road, which does not require getting on 75. But we don't have a lot of, for the west side of the county, a lot of shelters in those areas that can serve those individuals. And that's why I was wondering is there a need to create additional sheltering based on our experience with evacuations in the center of the county rather than on the outskirts where there are opportunities for people to shelter?
Would you like to respond?
Would you like me to provide some perspective on that?
Please, thank you.
Okay, yeah, so I think if you look at the evacuation zone maps, part of the reason the shelters are as far east and west as they are is because of the evacuation zone 5. Obviously, water can be pushed up the rivers and inlets, and so they need to be away. You're absolutely right that there are areas with fewer shelters than others. And I know the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council is undertaking a study now to be able to look regionally at shelters and where new shelters should be going. So that was not part of this study per se. And then in terms of 75 or not, what the behavioral information, which I did not spend a lot of time on, is there's a lot of people that do not go to shelters, and so they're going to go to family and friends just because family and friends. And so that's where I think the I-75 and the I-4 congestion comes into play.
Right. I think that part of it is that people don't know where exactly to go. It'd be really kind of cool on our emergency center that you could put your address in and it would show you where the nearest shelter is. And then you could go there rather than guess at the one that you heard about. And I think that would be incredibly helpful. We have technology that could potentially do that, but I don't know if that's something that we could work on. But having people know where they need to go in the closest place that would allow them to get somewhere without getting on 75 on those pinch points or I-4 would probably be really beneficial to helping people know where to go. But thank you very much for your analysis. And the piece that I am still concerned about is housing stock, and that we typically in those areas where are shelter-in-place areas. But if your house can't stand 140 mile an hour winds, it's not a shelter-in-place location. And we have a lot of old stock in the center of the city that is in that category. So that I think does need to be addressed too. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Cullen?
Thank you very much. First of all, I think this was an excellent report, and there's a lot of really good information in here. Just as a backdrop, a lot of people are in evacuation zones today that they weren't in just a year or two ago. I know in my own case, I went from Zone B to Zone A in this last revision. So the number of people that are going to be evacuating is going to continue to get larger. This is great information. I think a lot of other agencies, the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council was mentioned, have done some really good studies on this. They get presented to different boards, but we're not the ones that implement the emergency policies. It's our staffs that do it. And I'm wondering, how do we make sure that this type of report gets into the hands of the staff of all of the different agencies that are involved in an evacuation? You have the municipalities, you've got, things like the port and the airport. How do we make sure that everybody's got access, not just to this report, but to all the reports that everybody's doing, so that there's some sort of central depository for all this really good information?
So, thank you, Commissioner Overman and Chair Cohen, for your comments. Just wanted to address first, Mr. Cohen, your comments. So that's one of the reasons we were very careful to engage emergency management staff throughout this process. So I think one of the recommendations coming out of this is really coordination, because we found in our modeling for the evacuation modeling that communications is as effective as doing some facility changes. So I want to follow up with those agencies and make sure that, we can follow up with the LMS working group, follow up with the Tampa and Hillsborough Emergency Management. We're already talking to them, but it's great that you're in support of, additional coordination. So I Yes?
Well, I was
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
say, I think you need to talk to Pinellas and
Okay.
the surrounding areas
Yes.
as well, because I know that, for example, again, where I live right near Gandy Boulevard,
Uh-huh.
Gandy is going to be a evacuation destination
Yeah.
for people from Pinellas County. So while we have people in South Tampa maybe evacuating north, we're going to be dealing with an influx of people coming from the west. So we need to, I think, broaden the group that we're talking to.
You're absolutely right. In fact, in the Resilient Tampa Bay study, we found the approaches to Gandy were also infrastructurally vulnerable to flooding. So I was going to ask, Karen mentioned that Regional Planning Council has been doing a sheltering study. In addition to the coordination and talking to the other TPOs, I could ask them to bring that report to this body if you would like to hear that presentation, or at least have the report in your addendum if that helps. I don't know if they're quite finished yet.
I don't know if they are. I mean,
yeah.
I serve on it. We
Right,
actually had our
right.
meeting on Monday. Councilman Citro does
Right.
as well, I think, from the city. We
Okay.
could certainly get anything that they have.
Okay.
But they're a great resource in terms of reaching all
Yes.
these other governments up and down the coast, particularly in Pinellas, since there's so many of them.
Right, I think their One Bay Resilient Community Group is another place we hope to take a study like this to spread the word a little bit and just, get the data. We actually, with the Regional Planning Council, we're always sharing data back and forth, especially on storm evacuation and resiliency. So I think we'll probably have a good foundation for that, but I agree we need to do more coordination, at least more information sharing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Smith?
Thank you. And looking at, this is a great springboard and good discussion for looking at the big picture and considering the buildings that we now know are not as resilient or as we would want to make them. So we're catching up to doing that, and now we can do things better moving forward. And similarly with the evacuation routes and trying to catch up providing shelter space, enough shelter space. And we can, consider what kinds of buildings and where we can begin adding to that resource. But at the same time, I think this is a really, really good context for considering the importance of not exacerbating this problem. I mean, when I saw that slide that says everybody in Zone C has to evacuate in a Category 3 storm, we get those not infrequently. Everybody in Zone C evacuates in a Category 3 storm, and that's 542,000 people, 1/3 of the county population. And then presumably people in Zones D and E have to evacuate in a Category 4 or 5 storm, and God forbid, but we're certainly not immune to that situation, and we need to plan for it. And that would be evacuating 1 million people. So I'm just pointing out that part of the solution that is in our hands is not only widening the routes, evacuation routes, and adding shelter space and informing people about sheltering in place, but it is also minding our comprehensive plan and not exacerbating the problem by putting more people in those zones, particularly the coastal high hazard area, as our comp plan tells us. We should not be increasing density there. So, and yet we get frequently applications to increase density just there. Now that we understand how that we don't have enough room, enough evacuation routes, it's not just a matter of considering putting more individuals and their homes in a coastal high hazard area where we're putting those individuals at risk of flooding and their home investments at risk of loss in hurricanes. We are adding to this whole systemic problem of evacuation and shelter space and information. And so there are things we can do from all these angles. And one of them is to be very mindful of not exacerbating the problem in that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I want to
Director
add on
Kluge?
to Commissioner Cohen's comment about the evacuees from Pinellas County and perhaps Manatee County, other counties. Does this study take into consideration the impact of those evacuees, not only on traffic, but the shelters in our county? And also, secondly, does it take into consideration the beneficial impact of the Gandy extension? I know as a resident south of Gandy, that's made a huge difference in the traffic on Gandy Boulevard. There's a lot less traffic on Gandy Boulevard. It used to be a parking lot in the afternoons. But do those two issues been considered in this study? Thanks.
I can respond that this did look at regional evacuation. So while we report some information only for Hillsborough, the modeling does take into effect what's happening in in Pinellas and in Manatee and the pass through, as well as potentially stopping in Hillsborough County. In terms of the Silman extension, the Gandy extension, that was not included in that model network. So that obviously would be a benefit for the future.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that has comments to make? Ms. Alden.
Thank you so much. And this has been a great discussion this morning, and I really appreciate the board's leadership in identifying this as a topic that needs to be studied. The purpose of this study was to see if there were some transportation improvements we might want to recommend, and I personally was surprised by what Ms. Kozlowski reported, which was that additional capacity on a major thoroughfare like I-75 is not making a significant difference in the clearance times. What makes the most difference in the clearance times, according to their analysis, was the time frames that people choose to evacuate, and are they following that guidance? So that just makes it super important what you were saying, Commissioner Cohen, about it's so essential to partner all around the region and spread that information.
Thank you. I don't know if there's any other comments to make, but I think it was 2004, and I was an aide in District 1, which is the district on the waterfront, and that was at the time that we had 4 hurricanes in 2 months. And it was, and one of them that was going to hit was Charlie, and an hour before it hit Punta Gorda, and really, as we all know, just destroyed Punta Gorda. But it was headed till an hour before. We thought it was headed right, pretty much to county center where we're sitting right now, and we had started, and everybody was very, very concerned, particularly about that one. But we had started evacuating 5 days before, and that's when I saw the kinds of. It really gave me an impression about the emergency procedures that you need to put in place. And we were evacuating at that time special needs and making sure that that was done. But, I saw the machinery, the incredible kind of work that the staff at emergency services and everything we faced, and kind of how it was what was needed when a really dangerous storm was going to hit us, and it made a deep impression on me. I don't know what to say other than to say that we do have some I do remember one thing was, some of it was some people wouldn't leave their very dangerous mobile homes. We run into that every time. But also at the time, and this has improved incredibly, lots of people would not leave dangerous places due to pets. And I think that between those 2 months and now, some 15, 16, 17 years later, we have many, many more shelters that accommodate pets. And I think we've even gone further with looking at what we need to do. I actually think one of the messages that isn't quite out there is about sheltering in place if you can. That is one of the best places for you to be if you're not in a threatened place that is when we don't have people on the roads and using resources if they, are at smaller risk. I think sheltering in place is a huge message to bring to people. But this was a very good presentation, gets us thinking. I'll just say a couple other things with regards to transportation was one I know some time ago there was a big state initiative about putting shoulders on roads going north, or I suppose to on the one side center, because they really weren't willing to. I know there was some suggestion there about going one way on the roads, which I understand people, state officials in a really dangerous situation think is too cumbersome and doesn't really work very well. So, I don't know the status of where any of that was, but it was just for storm purposes, which, again, I'd really like to see emphasizing sheltering in place and getting people to shelters as closely as possible. Another item of sheltering is not just the flood and the peril of the wind. It is, as we all know who have sat through these storms, the loss of power. And when you lose power, I did it once for 6 days, more recently for 3. And I had neighbors that lost it for 9 on the same time that I lost it for 6. And, then the heat and the humidity come, and it's a terrible situation, especially if for people that are not able to weather the lack of power. And the kinds of things that happen when that happens. So that's one more thing. And then the other thing I think is interesting, as I've read several accounts about now that we go to electric vehicles, and both the benefits and sometimes the issues in terms of mass evacuations with that. And I read some stories where people just found it wonderful. They had their car charged up and ready to go, and they didn't have to. Everybody else was stopped on I-75 and couldn't get to gas stations, and the gas stations didn't have gas. So there could be some great benefits as far as that's concerned, also just in terms of the days after a hurricane. And finally, I'd just like to mention that there truly are, if we got hit by a terrible storm, there's truly some benefits to ferry service because they can be just put away and protected in the storm and come out and provide where roads are down or other services are down. They can provide benefits to moving things in and getting help quickly. So those are just some comments in terms of the presentation. But thank you very much. It was really good, and I think very good discussion. And I guess we have to get this item.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, were you going to say?
Well, I'm just wondering, what are we doing with it?
We're, yeah, thank you for your comments. I wanted to just mention real quick that we were aware of the interest in contraflow and then the use of shoulders. So we actually went ahead and modeled using shoulders for evacuation. And Karen can speak a little more on this. We might be out of time, but it's detailed in the report. We didn't find a lot of benefit with using the shoulders. What happened was all the excess capacity just went onto the shoulders. So, and the
Thank
end
you.
communications was the.
That was
Yeah.
always my instincts about it.
Right.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, and we asked about contraflow because we talked to a number of stakeholders, and it's really that there's not enough person power to staff a reversible lane and can be very dangerous, and they also need to bring resources into the state to deal with evacuation. So we were very conscious of some of those issues, and we did a little more research in the report that I can pull up for you if you have questions in the future.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much
Right.
for, I didn't expect necessarily to have too much. I noticed it was
Yeah.
just touched on in the report. So
Yeah.
when I read that some years ago, a whole
Yeah.
article on that, that was kind of what I,
Yeah, it's been, I think, one way that's been suggested for dealing with, the evacuation, but it's, I think, operationally not feasible right now. So yeah, there's a lot more meat in the report. We realize we're always a little bit short on time, but the report is already online, and we're happy to send it to you directly as well.
Great.
So what we're asking for today is just for you to accept the report. Thank you very much for all the comments. I think I found those really useful, and accept the report, then we'll move it on. And I think we're going to try to share it with other jurisdictions and the Regional Planning Council to get the information out there a little more. Yeah.
thank you. So we have a motion to accept the report by Councilman Maniscalco. Do we have a second? Okay. And Commissioner Overman is second. And with that, do we have any more comments at this time?
I have one more question. I'd like to make for the record, what we heard was that communications is critically important, and knowing where to go is critically important. So we could address congestion by having on the emergency management site a button where you put your address in and it shows you where the nearest shelter is without necessarily getting on the interstate. So I think that could help with our congestion rather than
Yes.
reverse
Yeah.
roads. We provide the communications.
Yeah, Ms. Over, actually, that's a great idea. The county has actually quite a robust site, and so does Department of Economic Opportunity, actually. But I don't know if that address lookup is specifically there. I know you can find the right shelter, and even if it's a pet shelter, but I'd be happy to kind of reflect that back and see. They have a really good technical staff, so I'm sure that won't be too
I think it's a
hard.
great opportunity to improve communications
Okay.
in an emergency, so.
Yeah.
But
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. The other thing I don't know about that is just kind of limitations for certain shelters or like pets or things like that. And that might be, but great suggestion.
Yeah, on our map, we identified the pet shelters because we remember from the first discussion we had that was a outstanding issue.
Great. Okay, and so with that, we have a motion to accept the report by Councilman Maniscalco, seconded by Commissioner Overman. If we could have a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Kemp?
Yes?
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes.
Councilman Maniscalco?
Yes.
Commissioner Overman?
Yes.
Commissioner Myers?
Yes.
Charles Klug?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move to status reports. I guess we have 56 and 50th Street Corridor Planning Study. I think your microphone isn't on.
Perfect, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Musselman with Kittleson. I'm a consultant for FDOT. I don't think Brian Schroyer is on, but just in case, want to give him a second. If he wants to introduce anything for this study, you can go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so I'll jump in. I know you have a few more agenda items to get through this morning, so I'll try to stick to the highlights. We presented on 56th Street to this committee about a year ago. I'll go through a quick recap of some of that study background, and then really want to spend most of the few minutes this morning on some of the concepts that we've put together and plan to share with the public later this month. Next slide. Next slide. So we are looking at about 8.5 miles of 50th and 56th Street in Hillsborough County, from the Selman Expressway to the south up to Fletcher Avenue. That piece between Fowler and Fletcher is county maintained. It is not FDOT maintained, but wanted to look at the whole stretch for some consistency and provide some recommendations to the county as well. The very southern piece between I-4 and the Selman is 6 lanes. Most of it is 4, 2 in each direction. Pretty varied speed, as we'll get into in a bit here, and a lot of transit service on this corridor with the Net Park Transfer Center immediately adjacent. Next slide. We're about 2/3 of the way through the study, just wrapping up. As I alluded, we have some preliminary concepts that we want to share with you all today, get feedback from the public before putting together our preferred alternative, working with our project advisory group made up of the cities and counties and transit agency. Next slide. Our purpose statement, this study was started because of the Hillsborough TPO Vision Zero Action Plan. There are 2 segments of the high injury network on this corridor, one on 50th Street and one on 56th Street. So the primary purpose is to eliminate fatal and severe injury crashes on this segment. We want to do that by prioritizing accessibility and multimodal options. We want to use both design strategies and operational strategies to help us achieve this goal, and support the communities that are there today and the communities that we expect to be there in the future. Next slide. Next slide. So some of the background information, as I mentioned, this is a very robust transit corridor, one of HART's highest ridership routes. The dots on the screen, the bigger the dot, the more people getting on and off the bus at that location. So you see Net Park on the bottom right of the map is the largest area, but also a lot of activity, and as folks are connecting on some of the east-west segments, Hillsborough, Fowler, trying to connect to destinations throughout the county. Next slide. Safety concerns up and down the corridor. You can see from the map, there's not just one place where we're seeing a lot of crashes. It's consistent throughout. We have King High School, which I know folks, staff, Gina in particular, has done a lot of outreach in that area up by Sly. And then we have those 2 high injury network segments along the corridor. So safety is a primary concern out here and one of the main focuses for this study. Next. As far as congestion goes, today, not seeing that as a major problem. Most segments and intersections are meeting FDOT's level of service target, which is D or better. There are a couple of the major intersections that are getting to that level of service E threshold, where we're starting to see a bit more congestion than we would like, but not a major concern so far. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, speed is a big issue, and that goes hand in hand with safety. Posted speed varies between 35 and 50 miles an hour, but regardless of what the sign says, folks are going 50, 55, 60 miles an hour pretty consistently out here today. And that bottom fact on the screen, at one location in 24 hours, we saw more than 150 vehicles going 70 miles per hour and above. So we're seeing interstate level speeds out here on one of our arterial streets. Next slide. And it's a very diverse corridor. 2/3 are non-white, either Hispanic or Black. And there's a big low-income population out here. The majority of folks make less than the median income for Hillsborough County. And there are several clusters and communities that are living in extreme poverty, under $17,000 a year for their household. So these are folks that have to rely on walking, biking, taking the bus to get around, may not have access to a vehicle. And a lot of children traveling on this corridor with King High School, Temple Terrace Elementary School, several private schools, and a lot of children living on the corridor. We have a lot of activity and vulnerable users that we're trying to serve. Next slide. Keep going, thank you. So we had an initial public meeting back in December. That was around the time we came to you before, just to confirm some of the things that we had seen, see if there was anything that we missed. Next slide. Some of the same themes coming up from the public: safety, speeding, wanting to support the transit service that's out there today and possible enhancements to transit service in the future. wanting to improve the conditions for people that are walking and biking out on 50th and 56th Street. And then some notes on land use within the city of Tampa and Hillsborough County as well. Not expecting a ton of change, actually wanting to preserve some of that industrial land use. But in the city of Temple Terrace, a lot of redevelopment currently happening and expected in the future. So I want to make sure our alternatives are supporting those plans the city has. Next slide. Next slide. So we'll start with some of the intersection changes we're proposing. These are kind of high-level groupings. We'll show you a couple of examples of what this looks like, but wanting to prioritize space for bicyclists with these protected intersections that have those little median islands so that bicyclists who are waiting and trying to make turns have a safe place to do that. Wanting to make the pedestrian crossings as short as possible and as direct as possible and add refuge islands in the middle where we can. And doing this by taking a closer look at the number of right turn lanes and left turn lanes that we have out here, if there's any that we can shorten or repurpose to provide extra space for those treatments. Next slide. So 2 examples of what this could look like. This is 56th Street and Hillsborough Avenue. This is an example of one of the larger intersections. You can see we have those corner islands for bikes, so that green space is for bikes to be able to safely get through the intersection. We're significantly reducing the pedestrian crossing out here and keeping almost all of the vehicle lanes. So what we did was we took those sweeping right turns, we brought them in. We still have right turn lanes, but they're tighter into the intersection, so they're not taking up as much space. We did eliminate one of the right turn lanes, and as a result, we're increasing the vehicle delay by about 3 seconds in the peak hour, but reducing that pedestrian crossing distance, providing extra space for bicyclists, and expected to reduce crashes by eliminating those high-speed right turn movements. Next slide. And similar example, but at a little bit of a smaller intersection, Sly Avenue. This is the intersection that is serving King High School. So there is going to be a bit more traffic in and out of here, especially on bicyclists and pedestrian kids getting to school. So a lot of the same themes, pulling in some of these high-speed right turns to create more space for bicyclists and pedestrians, still keeping the number of through travel lanes, so not major impacts to congestion, adding a few more seconds of delay here, but if you've driven out here, Sly can handle it a little bit more than Hillsborough Avenue can as far as the congestion that's there today. And in this case, we're also able to reduce the pedestrian delay quite a bit, so folks aren't waiting out on the corner in this hot, muggy heat for as long as they are. Next slide. Then getting into some of the section changes. So in the southern part of the corridor where there's 6 lanes today, you can go to the next slide. We have several options. 3 of the 4 do repurpose one of the travel lanes to create space for bicyclists. The first one would be a lower cost option where we keep the existing curb and do a 2-way separated bike lane. The one on the right would be pulling the curbs in a 1-way separated bike lane. Staff preferred this option to limit some of the bicycle conflicts at driveways when we have the bikes traveling opposite directions. The third was to create a wide sidewalk or shared use path. And then in some sections, not the whole stretch, there is an on-street bike lane, and so we can repurpose that on-street bike lane to create a wide sidewalk and maintain the 6 lanes. We don't have that luxury in that entire segment. In some cases, the only way to increase space for bicyclists and pedestrians is to purchase right-of-way or repurpose a lane. Next slide. We did a quick traffic analysis. I won't spend too much time on this, but we think the segments can handle going down to 4 lanes in the future. We looked at 2045 volumes. For the most part, they're still operating in that comfortable zone of level of service D or better, a couple getting into level of service E. But if we think about an urban environment, that may be something that we're willing to tolerate out here. It's a decision for you all and for the community to consider the trade-offs of that. Next slide. Majority of the corridor, you can see the map on the right, is a 4-lane section with a lot of green space. There's open drainage out here. Next slide. And so we have a lot of flexibility in these sections to tighten things up and increase space without impacting vehicles. So the first option on the left is a short-term option where we can add a shared use path and get that treatment in pretty quickly in the near term, and then in the long term, adding curb and gutter, which has been shown to help slow speeds, especially in some of these suburban contexts, pulling the cars a little bit tighter in and adding that separated bike lane on the street as well. Next slide. And the third unique area is the downtown Temple Terrace section. So currently it's 4 lanes with sidewalks in shared lane marking, so the bicyclists are encouraged to share the lane with traffic. And if we think back to that slide, cars are going 50 plus miles an hour, so this is not the most comfortable bicycle facilities that we have out here. Next slide. So with the building stock in Temple Terrace being pretty close to the street, we think our best options to be able to prioritize more space for bicyclists and pedestrians is to pull in the lanes a bit to add a wide sidewalk. And then the second option pulls in the median, narrows the median, creating a 2-way left turn lane with the spot medians to then get more of a full shared use path. So bicyclists and pedestrians are sharing space, but they're doing so separated from vehicles. Next slide. And we had a little fun imagining what Temple Terrace could look like in the future. So that top right is where they've already started to redevelop. If this continues, this is what it would take from a land use and transportation perspective to really create a downtown environment. So this is not just on FDOT. A lot of these changes have to happen at the city level as well to pull the buildings in, reconnect some of the local street grid, and then we start to get a more consistent block network that you would see like where we are here in downtown Tampa. Next slide. Keep going. So we're hoping to wrap up the study by the end of the year. After we meet with the public, we'll regroup with our technical team of city and county staff, HART and FDOT, to work through a preferred alternative, and then finalize our report by the end of the year. So next slide, I think it's one of the last. Our public meetings, we do have 2 in-person options, one in Tampa at the Holiday Inn by I-4, and then one up at the Miller Community Center over by King High School on Sly Avenue. And then there's a virtual option as well at the lunch hour. It's trying to make it as easy as possible for folks to join at different times and in different locations. So I think the last slide is just Brian Schroyer's contact information, our project manager from FDOT. I'm happy to take any questions or comments y'all have.
Thank you. Councilman Maniscalco.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the wonderful presentation. I drive through here on a regular basis, so I'm through here and I see how it becomes a racetrack because it's so wide open, and it's very difficult to maneuver, especially in certain parts, like south of Hillsborough. I usually take Hillsborough and then I take a right and go south, but it's tricky. Visibility isn't the best if you're pulling out of some of the side streets. I notice as a reference point, I see the cemetery, Myrtle Hill. The reason I take this road is because my family's buried there. So I see if I want to go north and take a left out of there, it's very tricky. There's a very, in some parts, the minimal center divider, I don't think is adequate enough, and people are coming around, especially in that section towards the cemetery. South of Hillsborough, you're coming down a winding area. Being that it's wide open, people will forget about the speed limit, and because it's very traffic lights are set far apart, there's not real opportunities to slow down the traffic. So I'm glad that you're bringing this up. I know farther north in the Temple Terrace area, it has been beautified and changed over the years, but people are still not respecting any of the pedestrian enhancements that we have in place. They're still 50 to 70 miles an hour going through there. I know that there's a lot of improvements that can be made and will be made, per this study. So I appreciate that because I think this is one of the roads that is heavily traveled, but people don't really talk about enough. And it deserves the attention, as you've shown, in order to improve it. Thank you.
Thanks. So we thank the TPO for initially raising it to the top of the list. So
Thank you. Thanks. Commissioner Overman.
Thank you, and excellent presentation. It's great to see that we're looking at ways to actually improve the way people move through it, whether it be in a car or on a bike or on feet. But as you have mentioned, the average speed in this corridor is just unacceptable, obviously. So doing something is critically important. My question is on the level of the roads that actually is FDOT's responsibility versus the county's responsibility. In order to make these improvements, what local funds would, or an estimate and a percentage, what local funds would be necessary to move this project forward versus what we could anticipate as being a funded project by FDOT?
Yes, good question. I don't have the specific numbers. We're waiting to pick the preferred alternative to do the cost estimate. The nice thing about some of the concepts is they can happen in pieces. So that shared use path can happen as one project. It's lower cost while we wait for funding to maybe do a larger reconstruction. We can reconstruct one intersection, not have to wait for the whole thing. So we can break it up into pieces to move things forward. I think FDOT is trying to leverage their resurfacing program. So as segments of 50th and 56th Street come for resurfacing, we'd be looking to add changes there. They're also open to add projects into the work program and would want to work with TPO staff to prioritize different projects and segments. And I think they'd always be open to local funding, but it's definitely a safety priority for the district to start to make some changes.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, but it would require local funding that we currently do not have. Is that correct?
When you say local, you mean city and county
Yes.
funding. I'm sure it would be helpful to advance them more quickly.
Excellent. Thank you.
Is there anyone else? I'd just like to say, like Councilman Maniscalco, I fairly often ride this, and so I'm familiar. I take this road. And I think many people don't realize that Hillsborough Avenue, while it's busy on the west side of 275, as you move towards the east, as you get further and further east, it's not nearly as busy. And especially at the intersection, I think the massively overbuilt intersection at Hillsborough and Temple Terrace is just really what's not needed. And we're very close into the urban area where we could use a more walkable and usable model for the future, I believe. And then going up north on 56, I couldn't agree with the analysis more and the words of Councilman Maniscalco. As you go right up before you approach Temple Terrace, it's, again, just a wide speedway, barely used, or, for the width of the road in both of these places, the number of lanes, it's not highly used. I know you showed the level of service E, but when you look at that, and I always find this a little disturbing, the only things, one part was covered for me on the screen, but the level of service E was at the ramps. And I always find that disturbing that the ramps are included, because I look at that as a different kind of problem when the ramps are coming off a major road, and that's the problem. And that's where the level of service E, not where the traffic moves along these major roads. And so I look at that differently, but I think this road is definitely could be re-engineered. I'm not sure what the best plan is, but it's crying out for change. And obviously you can see that by the speeds. And as well, I know that in the last decade or so, putting in sharrows has been, the markings for bicycles has been one of the things we've done. And to welcome bicycles, but I would never put a bicycle there. I'm not sure how often it's ever used, but we definitely need that area to be an area that is safe for bicycling, safe for walking. And I know Temple Terrace had, I'm not sure if they're still doing it, but I've been a couple times to where they had an annual day where they closed it off on a Sunday, and it was wonderful and very well used at that time, and gave you some ideas about some new possibilities out there. So I think this is desperately needed attention. I think it could be one of our really wonderful roads, and there could be a lot of opportunity there for infill and redevelopment, but that infrastructure really needs attention in a big way. So like Commissioner Overman, I'd be very supportive of if we could possibly move this up and start making this more focus for our resources and a target area. So this is a very good report. And with that, we don't have to do anything. We don't have to accept it or anything. So we can just move to, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Excuse me.
Yes. I'm
Sorry.
sorry. I looked before and I did not see a hand up there, but sorry about
My
that.
hand wasn't up, it just popped up now.
I know you live there.
I have lived there, and like Councilman Maniscalco, I still stop in the cemetery there where my family is. But also thinking about bicycles, when I did live there, my husband bicyced to work from Temple Terrace to Tampa General Hospital. He commuted up by bicycle. That's not as anywhere near as safe now as it was 20 years ago. But as I look at this and consider the kinds of pedestrian and bicycle improvements that I see even in areas like Tucson nowadays, much less in other countries, I think this corridor is one we should aspire to get the real separated bicycles and pedestrian each have their own separated lanes, separated entirely from cars. In a lot of the neighborhoods that we are looking at and working with developers more and more to provide connectivity and some bicycle pedestrian infrastructure, it's completely appropriate to put something like these 10 or 12 foot wide walks, as you're calling them. But in this corridor, where I think it's really possible for people to do a lot of their errands locally in Temple Terrace, as well as to ride their bicycle longer distances and use this corridor that way. I just want to encourage us to look at the higher end, the safest bicycle pedestrian infrastructure. Certainly, putting sharrows on the road is not going to encourage anyone who's not already the most avid bicyclist commuter to share the road. But if we provide really safe, separated bicycle structure, pedestrian structure from the car structure, we will actually attract more people out of their cars onto their bicycles. And if you are planning for a lot of that bicycle pedestrian traffic, a wide walk will soon, reach its capacity in terms of to a point of discouraging both bicyclists and pedestrians from using a shared path if it's, people with bicycle strollers, people walking their pets, as well as people really riding a bicycle trying to get somewhere, not just recreational, ring the bell, tring, trings, excuse me, I'm going to pass you, but really using it for transportation. And I think this is a corridor where we should try to devote the resources and planning to making a real bicycle pedestrian alternative to car transport, not just for sharing a sidewalk for getting out into fresh air. Thank you.
Thank you. And if we can make it really fast, I don't think we're going to be able to get to the rest of the agenda, but I know
Yeah,
Commissioner Overman wanted to add a comment.
Yeah, that was just to point out in the report, it shows that a majority of the people in that area either have no car or only one. So what Commissioner Smith is mentioning is critically important in that particular area because there are so many people that ride bikes and walk, and it's not really designed to do so at the moment. So prioritizing that would be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. Great comments. And I just had someone who asked about if the context class map that the county has, a complete street guide, has been part of this consideration. I'm not certain, but I'll just bring that comment to you. And one thing that I always think about that, I always want to say on all of these is shade, 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 please. As I remember that day when I was walking up and down and it was very, very hot, and I see a paucity of trees. So I just like to, I don't know how that works into these. I know it's a little bit different, but we need a lot more shade over there in a lot of places in our roadways. So
And we did talk to Hillsborough County staff and coordinate with their context classification. So
Great.
They had a chance to weigh in on that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all.
And I don't know, Ms. Alden, do you have recommendations? Because it seems like maybe, should we move these to the next meeting or?
We can certainly defer the discussion about the transportation system sales surtax planning portion to next month. That is not urgent. Ms. Kirk, would you be able to speak to the policy committee next month or the following month, perhaps?
Absolutely. Whenever you want me to present, I'm fine.
Great. And sorry about this. I thought we were going to be, we have one action item, and we had really good discussion. So, and thank you, Ms. Kirk, for waiting for us. So we can do that. And with this, I'll ask for, because we're running close to the time for the TPO meeting, any old or new business? Seeing none, let's adjourn. We have about 5 minutes or so before the TPO meeting.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the TPO Board. It is Wednesday, August 10th, and we are going to begin this morning with the Pledge of Allegiance, if everyone would like to stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, and can we please have a roll call?
Commissioner Cohen?
Here.
Commissioner Kemp?
Here.
Commissioner Overman?
Here.
Commissioner Myers?
Here.
Commissioner Smith? Councilmember Maniscalco? Here. Councilmember Citro? Councilmember Hurtak? Mayor Ross? Gina Evans?
Here.
Adelie LeGrand?
Here.
Greg Slater?
Here.
Charles Klug?
Here.
Planning Commissioner Powell? Board Member Vaughn?
And let's just try Commissioner Smith again, because she was here at the Policy Committee, and I believe that she is joining us online.
Of course. Commissioner Smith? I see her.
Are you hearing me?
I think.
There you go.
Commissioner Smith, we can't hear you, yes.
Thank you.
There we go. All right.
We do
Thank
have an
you.
in-person quorum. Chair, would you call for a consent vote for remote participation?
Yes, please. All those in favor of allowing remote participation, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Against? Okay, thank you. Just in terms of today's attendance, just for the record, let it be noted that member Jessica Vaughn is not here. She has obligations related to the first day of school in Hillsborough County, and that Mayor Ross and Councilman Citro are both attending the Florida League of Cities meeting. Mayor Kilton will be late, but he should be joining us shortly. So with that, we can move on with our agenda to the approval of the minutes of the June 8th, 2022 TPO meeting.
Move for approval.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And let the record reflect that Mayor Kilton just joined us. Thank you. We have 3 people signed up for public comment this morning. The first is Ron Weaver, and I believe he is here in person.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ron Weaver, 401 East Jackson Street. I rise because I understand originally there was a plan to have the downtown interchange and its 3 movements of additional lanes to the west and then the north, and additional lane for the south to the east movement, and additional through lane of our I-275, I-4 interchange. But that may have been postponed as far as public comment until, or might be postponed today, until September by request of Mayor Ross, and that it's perhaps premature for me to address the fact that I support those lanes and the urgency by which they are needed by the 3.2 million people and the citizens of this region who are dependent upon that interchange, and to try to use the improvement of that interchange as planned for the last 4 or 5 years, and has scaled down to a minimum effect upon about 7 properties instead of 400 properties in attempting to make that interchange work for all 3.2 million of us here in this region. So I'll come back in September, and I will emphasize, please, in September, that you take a look at that interchange with respect to reducing crashes. There were 1,000 crashes in that interchange in the last year, averaging 500 in a year in 2012. At that rate, I would have seen 18,000 crashes out my window, affecting 36,000 people if there are 2 in a car. And over the next 2 or 5 decades, there are between 40,000 and 100,000 people that will be affected by crashes in that interchange if we don't improve it for the 3.2 million regional citizens and 25 million tourists who are dependent upon these arteries. I'm not a cardiologist. With these arteries clogged, we need to look at what we do for our citizens and their educational and their medical and their family and their work urgencies, including moving our freight without delays and pollution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker that is signed up is Rick Fernandez. I believe Mr. Fernandez, are you there? Good morning. And are you donating your time to Candace Savitz this morning?
I am trying to. Did you all hear me?
Yeah, I just got your confirmation of that, so thank you. Ms. Savitz, are you on the line?
Okay.
She should be. Ms. Savitz, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Good morning. You have 6 minutes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Candace Savitz. I'm a longtime homeowner in Tampa Heights, and I oppose the 275 expansion project. I am speaking up again with hope that our elected leaders will take action and pay attention to toxic 275 capacity projects. Some of the damage has already been done, but future projects are still looming and residents are still at risk. I will keep documenting what's going on. I drive by these 6 underpasses on a daily basis now. We never wanted this capacity project damaging our beautiful historic neighborhood, and this project is poison to our families. I renamed it Toxic 275. Just last night at Martin Luther King, about 8:45, I got a video of jackhammering and toxic dust plumes flying through the air. There was no dust mitigation anywhere. It is my position right here, right now, that the airborne dust created from the jackhammering of the barrier edges off a lead-laden 60-year-old interstate is 1 million times more toxic than allowed under the provisions of the Clean Air Act. 1 million times more toxic. I want to make clear that I have a lab report that this airborne dust sample should not be classified as a soil sample. The dust is in the wind, is created by the shoddy construction practices of Lane and others. I also point out that the residents of Robles Park Village have window AC units, and that this toxic dust is most likely blown into the outside filters and vent systems and is poisoning this impoverished community. I have a list of professionals who will render expert opinions on the public toxicity, poor construction practices, and lack of adherence to the OSHA safety standards with regard to lead removal from an existing structure. My experts include a doctor who will detail the effects of inhalation of lead-filled dust by children, that it deposits in their teeth and leads to all kinds of health problems. Another expert of mine is a civil engineer from New York who worked on many transportation projects there. He took a look at some of my photos of the overpass expansion construction. His remarks, "This is dangerous and cheapo construction." Finally, an EMT who is OSHA certified in toxic removals says that none of the typical toxic mitigation standards are being followed. I'd like to see some documentation from the 275 project about OSHA training, but I doubt there is any. Also, I would like to mention a couple of things about my presence close to these construction sites. I have been harassed by workers in the common area, in the public area, shooting me the middle finger as I took pictures of them. I was followed by a lane, a pickup truck, chased down Central Avenue, residential area, stupid harassment. And then on the Chelsea West Side, I took a video of some men up there jackhammering, creating toxic dust, and then they all stopped and looked at me and made obscene gestures at me. And I want to point out that I do always stay in a public right-of-way, and I never harass them. I never comment toward them. I leave them the heck alone. FDOT is jackhammering so it can use old rebar for an interstate expansion. I just want you to think about that for a second. That's the reason they're creating toxic dust, is because they're reusing old rebar. This is terrible construction practices. This is a disaster waiting to happen. I have letters from Adam Klitzheimer, dated May 20th, Gregory Deese, dated June 20th, both related to FDOT, stating that a cut saw or a wet saw would be used to remove the toxic concrete barrier edge. This did not happen. Shoddy construction, jackhammering led to the toxic dust. I'll say it again. Airborne toxic dust is poisoning us. It's full of lead. It's highly toxic. Please, I implore anyone on this committee to care more about the people and less about the cars. We all learned how to stay home and work from home during COVID. We don't need these expansion projects. Do you think I give a darn about someone who saves 14 minutes driving from Lutz to downtown? Do you think the people of Tampa Heights should give up their health in their community so he can shave off 14 minutes of commute time? It gives me nightmares to think about the upcoming DTI project, adding expansion lane to a flyover. Dear God, will it have a similar fate as the FIU pedestrian bridge? DTI should be shelved right now. Find another solution. I am asking any of you who want to see my documentation to please reach out. Look at my lab report. Look at my videos. Talk to me. Ask me for my resume. I have a construction background. Thank you very much. I'm submitting my written response via email for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe that's all the public comment that we have signed up for today. Ms. Alden, before we move on, you have a special presentation that you'd like to give this morning. Yeah. Yes, Commissioner Kemp.
I think that honestly, I don't like to comment right away on public comment, but I think that was extremely compelling, and she offered experts and evidence, and I'm wondering, Ms. Alden, I'm wondering to this board, it just seems like we keep hearing this same complaint, and if what she says is accurate, then the complaint hasn't been dealt with, because we keep hearing about toxic dust, and we keep hearing about these issues. And I felt assured at one time that Secretary Gwen that it was going to be dealt with, and that we wouldn't have this issue in the construction. But I'm losing that confidence at this point, hearing this, and I think it would be something that maybe we could schedule if we have experts that can testify to this. If we need, I think we need FDOT. Again, I just don't see how this continues to happen. This is dangerous and risky, and this is not. I could talk about the other side in our decision, but I just think we need to act.
Let me ask Ms. Alden to comment. Ms. Overman, I see you have your hand up, but Beth, you had yours up first. You wanted, I think, to step in here for a minute.
Yes, I would like to suggest that we schedule this for a presentation at the next board meeting, so that our DOT representatives have an opportunity to check with their construction contractor. They did report to us earlier at one of our previous board meetings about the steps that they were taking that had become part of that construction contract. If there's a question of are those being adhered to, I think it makes sense to allow DOT to check in with the contractor and then report back to us.
Commissioner Overman.
I'm actually going to reject that recommendation, and the reason why, and then I need Cameron to give us some guidance on this. This has been going on for 3 months. It's not like we haven't asked this question or the issue hasn't come up. I'd like to make a motion that they cease work until they come back with a report, and if it takes a month to come back and tell us because they didn't show up today after this has been asked for. I've gotten 58 emails since May, 58, from a variety of members of the community regarding this issue. They're not all about the toxic dust, but they are about this project. And I drive underneath these intersections, overpasses every day. It is what we are hearing today by our public commenter is accurate from what everything I've heard. So we've kicked this can down the road for months now, and I would like to know what our options are for actually having something done about it today.
May I suggest that it sounds to me like a month is too long to wait for a report? Can we go ahead with our agenda and then come back to this a little later in the meeting with the idea that we'll have some kind of response that we can talk about? We can take up your suggestion if you're not satisfied with whatever information gets brought to us. Is that all right?
That would be fine. Thank you.
And that way, we'll continue on, but let's ask FDOT to please give us some response to this a little bit later on, maybe after we're done, when we get to the status reports section of the agenda.
Will do.
Ms. Alden.
Thank you. And I'll keep this brief, but I wanted to share with the board that one of our projects was selected as a noteworthy practice from among all of the practices of the MPOs around the state. There are 27, the 27 MPOs. Vote on which ones are of interest and that they want to share and learn more about. And actually, our project was the top picked one in the state. And the project was Resilient Tampa Bay. And so I'd like to invite Allison Ye, who is the project manager, to come up and receive this certificate, which was provided by the Florida MPO Advisory Council at the meeting, the quarterly meeting at the end of July. Allison, if you'd like to come up. Thank you. Resilient Tampa Bay was chosen in part because of the grant that the competitive grant that you were able to receive from Federal Highway Administration, the partnership that you built with Forward Pinellas, with Pasco MPO, and the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, and the proactive identification of vulnerable roadways for consideration in the long-range transportation plans of all of the MPOs. So congratulations,
Thank
Allison.
you, Ben. I just wanted to say it was a group effort, a regional effort, so could not have done it without our planning partners at Fort Pinellas and Pasco MPO and TBRPC. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice job. Nice job.
Allison, thank you. Congratulations. You do wonderful work. All right, we are going to move on to committee reports and advance comments. I believe Bill Roberts, our CAC chair, is here this morning. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the TPO. I'm Bill Roberts. I chair your Citizens Advisory Committee. We had two meetings. We met in July. Normally we recess in July, but we had a number of presentations that were backed up that we had not seen. So we saw those presentations in July. And then we had a regular meeting on August 3rd. We had a number of items come before us. The summary of our meeting is summarized in your packet, but I want to touch on a few points that I think may be of interest to the TPO board. We had several suggestions on the public partnership plan, which will come to you today. It suggested different public participation plan, excuse me. We had several suggestions on additional media that could be used and different methods of meeting the needs of the public to find out what is going on and what is happening with the TPO. We also had a request to clarify the method of conveying to members of the public when a project can no longer be removed from the tip, an item that this committee's heard about. And so we have suggested that that be included as a part of the public participation plan. We heard a presentation on the freight supply chain resilience study. The CAC did not approve this study. We felt that it lacked in a number of areas, including a lack of inclusion of the Vision Zero components that this board has approved. We also heard a report from the CFO of HART, which they were kind enough to provide a summary of their fiscal year budget. We thank you very much for that. There were a couple of questions raised regarding HART's budget. Most significantly, they asked what would be the effect of the American Rescue Plan funds, which are non-recurring. And we had received a promise that we would get a further report on the status of how that would impact HART's operational capabilities. We also asked the CFO if they would be able to provide us with a summary or some of the detail on the uses of the surtax funds that would be received by HART if and when the referendum is passed to add that in November. And then finally, we had a discussion about the reorganization of the CAC itself. I think Ms. Alden is going to give you a brief report on that, but we've asked the staff to come back to us after a pretty robust discussion we held, and the staff is going to give us 5 specific recommendations as to how we can make that CAC more diverse, more reflective of the demographics in our county and the geography in our county, because there's been a long-standing feeling amongst the committee members that we are not fully representative of some of the geographic areas in our far-flung county. So that concludes my report. I'll be happy to take any questions, and as I said, the summary of our meeting is in your meeting packet.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Mr.
Chairman
Roberts.
Crowell. I
Is
appreciate
there any questions?
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. And we will move on now to Davita Franklin and Beth Alden. I think they're both going to speak to us about some of the advanced comments related to the meeting. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Davita Franklin, and here's your summary of your committee reports, as well as your summary of your public comments. So pertaining to today's action items, the Public Participation Plan amendments were approved by the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, Livable Roadways Committee, the Transportation Disadvantage Coordinating Board, and as you heard, the Citizens Advisory Committee, of course, with some recommendations that they had. And the Technical Advisory Committee also approved the plan after discussing ways to demonstrate compliance to the plan. So for your summary of public comments, these comments were received through Facebook, Twitter, and email. And pertaining to the Public Participation Plan amendments, we did receive 3 comments. A 4th one was more related to the tip. So for the 3, Chris Vela suggested that the TPO keep the 21-day public notice period, but add a clause that states the period may decrease at times to 14 days. Mauricio Rosas did share that he sent the information on the Public Participation Plan, the amendments, to other organizations, and he also was asking for more ways where he can share that information. And then Rick Fernandez, Vice Chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee, felt that trust had been lost and felt the PPP, or Public Participation Plan, failed to provide notice of the location of sound walls in Tampa Heights. For all other comments, we had some comments from Jose Menendez and Jeff Redding. They both shared concerns about the increasing rate of bicycle and pedestrian deaths in the county. Neil Constantino would like to start an electric and manned autonomous circulator service in Davis Island, and he also supports repurposing the Howard Franklin Bridge, the span that the Florida Department of Transportation plans to demolish. Samantha Stryker invited the TPO to back to school night at Lanier Elementary School. Sharon Calvert shared concerns about the TPO's newsletter, including a link to a WMNF podcast that discussed the transportation sales tax. She also requested information about Critical Mention, which that's the service that we use. It's a news clipping service that we use to track when we're mentioned by media outlets. Andrew Morris suggested that rail transit be prioritized along I-275. Chris Vela did write in again. He asked if the TPO had considered recommending cordon or congestion tolling. And he also shared old plans about FDOT's plan. It was basically sharing the history of a plan to extend the I-275 to a North Boulevard exit. Mauricio Rosas was concerned about funding for the West Shore interchange. Dave Coleman is dissatisfied with the outcome of the June 8th, 2022 TIP public hearing, and he's also concerned about pedestrian safety. Rick Fernandez wrote in again. He's concerned about subsequent social media posts highlighting the June 8th, 2022 TIP public hearing because it could have used, in his opinion, more details about the outcome. Charles Eldridge supported turning I-275 into a boulevard. And then we did receive some compliments on Beth Alden, our executive director, for her presentation to Cafe Con Tampa from James Steele Olmsted and Rock King. So please note that the attachments that you received in the board folder yesterday, that email that you received rather, these comments are included in that packet, and this concludes my report. So Ms. Alden will now give you a report about the policy meeting that just occurred. Thank you.
Very briefly, the Policy Committee had one action item this morning, and that was to review the storm evacuation and shelter-in-place study report. The Policy Committee did support that report and forwards it to you for your approval. Members noted that public information and communications are critically important in addressing our hurricane evacuation times, and folks knowing when to evacuate and where to go may actually be more important than transportation improvements in addressing those evacuation times. Thank you.
Thank you. And seeing no hands at this time, I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda. We have a motion from Councilman Maniscalco, seconded by Commissioner Overman. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you very much. We have two action items this morning. The first is the public participation plan amendments. Davita Franklin from TPO staff will present this item. Thank you.
Hello again. So here's your presentation on the public participation plan amendments. And if we go to the next slide, just to give you an overview, the public participation plan contains guidelines and expectations that the TPO uses to guide our engagement with the public and also to help them engage with us. So basically, it's our roadmap to how we engage the folks in Hillsborough County and in the Tampa Bay area. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see that we have an example of a pilot program that helped guide the amendments here. So you're going to have 3 proposed amendments before you, and all 3 of them help guide the way that the TPO notifies the public about TIP amendments and also creates more transparency in terms of how TIP amendments how they evolve and what the projects that are in the amendments entail, and then also creates more accuracy for the time frame that we give the public to review TIP amendments. So what we found was, because of scheduling between the the Citizens Advisory Committee and the board, your meetings, there's sometimes a short window for the CAC to review TIP amendments before they come to you. The current public participation plan says that there should be 21 days of review for the public, but sometimes we get amendments in a shorter period of time, and so what we found is sometimes it's going to be about 14 days, and so we have created a way for us to address that, where if we do propose to you to have the public review period as 14 days, maybe there's a way where we can increase what we do with the community, so that way we're just giving them more bang for their bucks in terms of how we engage with them. So what you're looking at right now are 2 examples from a pilot that we did last year, where we said, okay, if we only have 14 days to have to allow for the public to review TIP amendments, what can we do to make it more successful in terms of engaging them? And we did 4 things. We posted the TIP amendments on dedicated web pages on the planhillsborough.org website. We posted social media posts for the TIP amendments, and that's what you see on the left-hand side there. We posted road signs at the intersections of communities where they were directly adjacent to wherever these projects were. And then we also put the TIP amendments, the notice into our newsletter, or at times it did hit the news media through a press release. Prior to this pilot, we only posted tip amendments on our website, and that was it. So as a result of this increased engagement, we did receive 24 comments throughout the year on tip amendments, where prior years we didn't receive any. So it was very successful in terms of what we did, and again, it was to help mitigate the idea that if we don't have as much notice as we had before for the public, maybe we can do more. So I wanted to show you this before I went into the changes that you'll see that we're proposing to the verbiage in the plan. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see some of those changes. So there's the grid that shows the minimum review period that we have for our different plans and programs. And there you see we're proposing that the TIP amendment time frame of public review changes from 21 to 14 days. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that, and that red there was actually something that came out of the Citizens Advisory Committee. We shouldn't say generally. So you'll see there that we're now changing verbiage to say 14-day review period, and also that we're saying that this is something that we will do at a public meeting. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that we are now putting there what we're going to do. Again, before it was just a dedicated webpage. Now we have these 4 things that we're doing to improve engagement and to receive more engagement from the community. And the next slide also shows the change of the verbiage there about mailing out notices. So that's something that we did add as a result to a committee members' feedback, which was mail out some information to projects when they require a right-of-way acquisition. So that's actually a 5th thing, but again, that is when, so it's not something that we would do every time. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see once again that we are putting there that instead of 3 weeks before TPO meeting, that we would have these postings 2 weeks before the meeting, which would review or consider TIP amendments. And I believe we have one more slide, which Chairman, so the Citizens Advisory Committee, you heard earlier that there was a concern about, actually no, this is not that. So this is again talking about what we're doing. Go to the next slide, please. There it is, to improve transparency. So there was a concern about when projects cannot be rescheduled or removed per Florida state statute from the TIP. And so we are proposing this 3rd amendment, which says that we will put this verbiage in there that says, the TIP now indicates this, and it does. We did make a change, which shows that which projects cannot be removed from the TIP. So that was not in the public participation plan before. It is the 3rd amendment that we're proposing. So you have 3 amendments before you. One is to change the time frame from 21 to 14 days. The other one is to say, hey, these are all the great things that we're going to do to engage with the public. And then the 3rd one is we're going to put this verbiage in there that talks about the improved transparency that we have put in place regarding when a project cannot be removed from the TIP. And so I did want to just mention a couple of other things before I request for you to consider approval. Okay, so I did want to just highlight that we did receive some more comments yesterday on ways that we could improve the TIP. You do not have this in your board packet, but we will send it to you. And basically, this is from Chris Vela, and he is actually suggesting, he sent in a comment on social media, and he has now sent these again, suggesting that instead of changing to a 14-day period of public review, that we keep the 21-day comment public review process, but then put a disclaimer saying that at times it could be 14 days. And this was an interesting comment because there is some truth behind this. We did find that out of the 4 projects that we did do our pilot process on, that 2 of those projects we were able to notify the public in 21 days. It just so happens that 2 other projects came in such a short time frame where we only had 14 days. So his comment kind of speaks to an alternate way that we could address that. He also has suggested that we commit to 1 social media post on all of our accounts. We have not specified that. We just said we're doing a social media post, but we do have Twitter and we do have Instagram as well. And he would like to see more advisory committees review TIP amendments, such as the Livable Roadways Committee and the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. And he also made a suggestion for increasing the public notice time for the Universal Work Program amendments. So that was one thing I wanted to just share with you. And then the other thing is, during the Citizens Advisory Committee meeting where they approved the PPP amendments, they did ask, or one of the members did ask, well, what do other MPOs or TPOs do? So I just wanted to share that I did some research, and it varies. So Hernando, they're 45 days. Pasco, they're 5 to 10 days. Polk TPO, they give 30 days notice. Sarasota Manatee gives 14 days. Broward, generally, and they say in quotes, generally, 30 days. And Miami-Dade, 14 days. So that's just another piece there to help you make your decision. So if we wanted to go to the next slide, it would be that I recommend approving the public participation plan amendments. Thank you.
Questions and comments from board members. Commissioner Overman.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your report. That was very helpful. I'm looking at page 24 where you're talking about the required public review. And I want to get a better understanding for those people that aren't on the internet. So they are not going to get a public notice based on this recommendation or a minimum ad required for the TIP amendments?
They will get a mailer if there is a right-of-way acquisition for a particular project. Well, you have a good point, which is why we're doing mailers, because if they don't have access to the internet, then they won't be able to see the social media posts or see our newsletter. So that was one way for us to address that. And again, that did come from one of the committee members.
Yeah, because social media posts is not considered public notice, I'm assuming. And we do have a significant population of people who don't have access to broadband, aren't on the internet, and aren't paying attention to social media posts because they will not sign up for things like TikTok or Facebook or Instagram or any of those kinds of things. So the only way they are aware is either through television, because they do have TV, or something they see in the newspaper. And our bias towards using social media only or our website as a way of communicating what's going on in our community has produced somewhat of a unequal or inequity type of situation for populations that are absolutely dependent on transportation investments. So I just wanted to ask the board's consideration on how we would go about with TIP amendments, because that's the last time we decide how to move forward and we notify the public what's coming, correct? On whether or not there is still a desire to have no requirement for minimum public notice or minimum ads at this point, because it's part of the recommendation in this particular thing. So I'd just like to get the board's thoughts on that one.
Let me go to, I know Commissioner Kemp wanted to raise, and if there are other people that want to chime in. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I'll tell you, I did not like the idea of this when I heard it, because I just don't want to do less notice. It felt uncomfortable to me. And I asked about why, which we haven't quite heard, and so maybe Ms. Alden can just explain why this was even, I wasn't even sure what generated looking at this. That might be valuable for you to.
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about that. And it's about our ability to respond when there's a little bit of state grant money left on the table in a particular budget year. Typically, it's money in the current fiscal year that was allocated to other projects. Those projects did not use up all of the money. There's a little bit left. We've been very strategic about our TIP priorities list in putting some lower dollar projects up at the top of the list so that if there is some money around, it can get allocated to a project in our area. And the way that we capture that is to allocate it to a project. DOT has to put it in the State Transportation Improvement Program. We have to put it into our Transportation Improvement Program. If we can reasonably shorten the time frame that we need to process that, it makes us a little bit more flexible and responsive. When we have 3 weeks advance notice, that means that we have to have all of our information materials for the public prepared in advance of the 3 weeks, which means we have a QC process that we're going over with the Department of Transportation to make sure that what we are saying about this amendment is accurate before we distribute that. And then that has to be in advance of the board meeting. So if even a week could make a little bit of difference in terms of, are we going to be able to hit that board meeting in February or March or in April? Because if we land in April, the DOT may not be able to obligate the money before the end of the state fiscal year, end of June. So it's always this race in the spring. And we've been trying to figure out how can we be as flexible as possible, bring projects to our residents, particularly ones that are on our priority list that we've been working on with the district staff, and still make sure that we are providing a good opportunity for members of the public to be informed and have feedback on those projects. In the table that you pointed out, Commissioner Overman, about notice, so there's 2 things to understand about that table. Notice is how far in advance is information generally available. In the past, we've made that available just on our website. So what we're doing now is being a lot more proactive about how we get that information out. It's not just posted on our website. I think one of our most successful strategies this past year with the pilot process was reaching out to journalists and folks who can give us a lot more coverage. So, for example, you mentioned ads. Ads are not required. And what an ad means is that we would be buying a little space in the classified section of the paper that's going to say there's a TIP amendment for the following thing. We're going to get a lot more attention if we're working with a reporter who then puts out an article about what is proposed to be funded, what's coming up. So that's what we're proposing to institutionalize with these PPP amendments. That's why they look the way that they do.
Commissioner Cap, you wanted to follow up?
Mm-hmm. So I appreciate that. I certainly didn't want to recharacterize what I'm sure you explained to everyone in briefings about this myself. But I have concerns about shortening the period. I understand the balance of why you're asking for it, as well as I think Commissioner Overman brings great points. I mean, it used to be that everybody used Facebook or they got emails, mass emails. But, you know, that is, social media is fractured every which way now too. And, you know, you can't get to you get to a certain group. You don't get even And there are some people that aren't on social media, as Commissioner Overman pointed out, for sure, and some people that don't have access to it. I appreciate that all these other outreaches, I think, are very good, because I think that that's what the world demands right now, today, and probably for the future. It's going to have to be a lot of mix of things. And, even if you are on social media, you don't necessarily see every small posting. Even if it desperately concerns you, you just might miss it, because it's kind of overwhelming, all the places that you need to look or know. I appreciate the presentation. It was I was really interested in, hey, I'm always looking at this. What do other places do? That's what I always want to know. And so what we heard is, I think Broward, 30 days, but Miami-Dade, 14 days. And, we did, it was some were 45 days. I always think the more the better. I understand the constraints on that. And I kind of liked, to tell you the truth, Mr. Vella's suggestion, because it sounds like we could have the best of both worlds. And I hadn't quite thought about that, but now that it's acknowledged that that is possible to do something like, and maybe Ms. Alden could clarify, but he said keep the 21 days, but have it in the notice that it could be 14 days. Is that something that we can legally actually do for notice, and is that a viable alternative?
Or you could potentially state that additional notice will be or shall be provided whenever there is an opportunity to do so.
So could you just, I'd probably like to make a motion to follow that. Could you just say how the motion, what language we would use to have a policy like that?
Sure. So something like would approve the PPP amendments with the addition of language stating that additional time will be provided for notice of TIP amendments whenever it's possible to do so.
Okay.
Yeah, it will. It
minimum
already
of
states
14
a minimum
days.
of 14 days.
Does that ensure, though? I would really like to make sure that every time we could do 21 days, that it's a rarely used.
So, Davita, you checked into this during the past year. We had 4 amendments that we did outreach for, and 2 of them. Is that right? We were able to provide more notice time.
Yes.
And do you know, was it 21 days?
They both were 21 days.
So 2 out of the 4 were 21 days during this past year.
Okay, so I would like to make a motion that we keep with the 21 days as much as possible, but that we allow for 14 days with...
As a minimum.
Yes, as a minimum with additional... in all cases, I think the additional notice was a good thing, but that's what my motion would be.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Councilman Hurtak. Councilwoman Hurtak.
I think I would be a little bit stronger about the 21 days, that we will use 21 days, except in special cases. I think that's, I completely understand Ms. Alden's point, but I also believe that 21 days is best practice. I think it's kind of between 45 seems a little much. 14 can be too short for some things, and it sounds like we have a good balance between 2 projects that did and 2 projects that didn't. So I think it's an odd language, but I think it would be used less often with these projects that pop up. So the public can generally expect to get 21 days, but every now and again when we get a special funding, it allows us to be a little bit more agile.
I'm just comfortable. I'm comfortable with any, strengthening of that to mostly fall on the 21 day when we can. I don't know, maybe our attorney can, if there's any suggestions about how we just,
Well, I guess I would note that, for instance, I guess what I consider a standard notice for a public hearing tends to default to what county notice is for ordinance adoptions, which is at least 10 days. Notice for a public hearing, I mean, the date of the hearing, the time of the hearing is known pretty well in advance. I think potentially if you notice something too far in advance, agendas and items that are on the agenda may yet change after that date. So whatever's available, like if it was, months in advance, there are things that can change in the meantime. So what people might be responding to isn't what's going to actually be at the hearing anymore, because things can be changed. But there's no restriction in terms of there's nothing in the MPO statute that creates a requirement for this. So there is a lot of discretion.
I see. Well, I would just, I guess if I craft the language, I'd like to say that we, and on the fly here, but I would like to make it the strongest, that we, in all cases, look for, to attempt to make it 21 days, but, in cases where that is precluded by, because we don't want to miss our opportunities to get the resources that are out there, that we allow for 14 days.
Is that acceptable to the seconder? Yes? Okay, I'm seeing assent. Is there any other discussion on this motion? Yes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With this motion, will this go into effect right now, or is this something that's going to come back to us, for any additional, comments, going out to the public? Because I heard some really great public comment that sort of led, to this. And I'm wondering if we should give the public a little more time to think about the language that we're putting forth today, to see if maybe there's another suggestion that can improve, what we're trying to do, and just fully understand, because I'm trying to follow what everyone is saying, and I'm not, an attorney, so that's not my, my strongest suit, but I'd like to have a chance to fully see it in writing and understand what we're about to do.
Ms. Alden, is this the last we're going to see of this, or will this come back to us again?
This will be a final decision. This is not the first time that we've talked about
Yeah.
it. We did review this topic with our biennial measures of effectiveness report for the public participation program, and this was one of the recommendations out of the report. We provided 45 days notice of the proposed changes to the public participation plan based on that measures of effectiveness report. And we have gotten, I think, a fair number of comments, both from our advisory committees and from the public. So I think it's up to the board at this point to make a decision about what's reasonable and fair.
Okay, yes.
I asked Ms. Alton just one more question. Do you feel like a motion as the one I've made allows you to do, gives you the flexibility to do what you have to do to, for those grant opportunities that you mentioned?
I'm not honestly totally sure what a special case would mean. I'm not sure how to operationalize that. But we could put the language into the PPP and then give it a try for the next year, see how it goes. We can always come back next year to refine that more.
Okay.
Commissioner Overman, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just have a quick question.
Mr. Klug, do you have your hand up? I couldn't tell because your light was on.
Yes, I was just having a suggestion. Right.
I'm sorry. Commissioner Overman, and then I'll come
Sure,
to you.
absolutely.
I apologize.
And just get for clarification, and the tip, just to kind of address what Mr. Powell is bringing up, there's, we're making a recommendation to one element of the plan. And I was curious if maybe you were asking if there were other elements that were up for discussion. My question alluded earlier to, methods of communication. And so I'm hoping that a press release that goes to the television stations, so they include it in their community stuff, that they do run through saying, hi, this is happening at this library or whatever, specifically targeting that kind of community action might not necessarily require a change, but could be adopted in order to be able to address those that may not be on social media, but use television as a way of communicating. So I don't think it's going to require a change, but I think we can accomplish the focus with the language that you have here. So I'm not going to make any kind of recommendation or changes. It's just to be aware that we need to make sure we're addressing those individuals that are not internet or social media attached to this wonderful world we live in. But with that, I'm willing to support the changes that are made at this point. And if that means we approve the plan, I'm willing to suggest that that's my second stands.
Mr. Klug, did you want to?
Yeah, I just want a clarification of the language. I would just suggest that we shall endeavor to provide at least 21 days notice, but no event provide less than 14 days notice. Something along those lines. I'm not quite sure what the motion is, but I would make that more of a, aspirational. We were endeavoring for 21 days, but we have to do at least 14 days.
I'm gonna let the maker of the motion and the seconder make their final determination on what the language will be.
And that sounds fine to me, and I actually got a suggestion by text, which I think is a good one. The suggestion was that if it is 14 days, that it just be explained of why it's a 14-day notification stated on the agenda. When you're doing the notice for the item, that you just, put in there the reason, we were a justification for why on those special cases. I think that might be a good clarification myself.
May I address that? So Pinellas County, I couldn't find their process, but they did have these explanations of when and why their TIP amendments were going through, and I did think that was interesting. So we definitely have an example that we can use. Thank you.
There we go. It's getting better all the time.
Well, I think we have a motion on the floor, and I think it'll provide us with language that will work. And if it needs to be revisited, we can revisit it. Councilman Hurtak, did you have a?
Yes. I like the additional language. I also love the idea of just adding it regardless. I think that's something that we should do as to why. But it sounds to me like we're watering down the 21, and I really feel like it should be 21, except when explained.
And that was my intention with the why.
Great. Great.
All right. Well, with that, all those in favor of the motion? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, I believe Commissioner Smith just voted for. All right, there we go.
That doesn't require a roll call? Okay. Sorry, point of order.
Yes.
I actually have a follow-up to that, and I would love if you could come back every 6 months to show how that process has worked. It can be super simple, just to let us know which 21 days or 14 days you've been able to utilize. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I got a head nod from my boss, so I think it's okay.
Yeah, so just every 6 months, just to let us know how it's going so that we don't forget about it.
Sure. I do want to say that, TIP amendments kind of come with the wind. So definitely 6 months. If you want it annually, I know that might seem a little far out, but that might give you a better picture if we had 4 in 1 year.
And the issue is clearly going to be in the spring. That's when this is going to be most likely to occur.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, just for now, and then yes, maybe we can extend it to a year, but while it's on our radar.
I don't think so. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, our next action item is the TPO Apportionment Plan. Elizabeth Watkins, TPO staff, is going to present on this item.
Good morning, thank you. Elizabeth Watkins, TPO staff. I'm here today to present a recap back from the discussion in May about the TPO Membership Apportionment Plan. And as a reminder of why we're talking about this now, this is required by state statute for every 10 years in conjunction with the decennial census that Florida MPOs reevaluate their voting membership apportionments. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned earlier, in May, the board directed staff to go back and formulate additional options for membership apportionment. And in doing so, staff used the following criteria. The top three were the primary criteria that we use, and those were, first, to retain existing voting membership at your direction. The second factor is to have proportional representation as directed by state and federal statute. And then the third factor was to suggest a membership apportionment in which mitigates any potential government in the sunshine violations. And as you may recall from the discussion earlier this summer, when we evaluated the membership of the Hillsborough TPO compared to other MPOs across the state, we do have a relatively high proportion of staff or non-elected or non-appointed officials on the board. And this causes some potential conflicts with government in the sunshine because often elected officials will need to speak with transportation agency heads to discuss programs or projects. And because staff's on the board as well as elected officials, that can inherently create a conflict if that topic would be to go before the TPO board because it would need to be publicly noticed. The second set of criteria that were a little bit less important but we wanted to keep in mind were to increase the proportion of elected officials. We heard that comment from some of the TPO committee, so we wanted to keep that in mind. And additionally, looking at scenarios that could possibly have an odd number of votes from an operational perspective to avoid any tie vote situations. Next slide, please. So one of the first things we did when we went back to the drawing table to propose some options for your consideration was to crosswalk the membership of the transportation authorities against the current membership of the TPO board. And what really jumped out at us is what's circled in red, and that's the elected officials who also serve on those transportation authorities, so the Airport Authority, Port Authority, Expressway Authority, and HART. Next slide, please. So the first option for your consideration is to have elected officials who sit on those transportation authorities boards represent them on the TPO's board. Everything else about the membership apportionment would say the same, except again, for HART, it would either be Hillsborough County, City of Tampa, or the City of Temple Terrace, a board member there representing HART. And then for the Airport Authority, Port Authority, and for THEA, that would either be the City of Tampa or Hillsborough County representative. This option meets the mitigation of any potential government in the sunshine issues, as well as also respects the directive in state statute and federal statute to have proportional representation in the board makeup, because 70% of the planning area comes from the unincorporated county, and in this scenario, all 7 Hillsborough County BOCC board members would also be on the board. Next slide, please. We put together an example to just help visualize if this membership apportionment strategy were to be in place today, what that would look like, understanding that there are fewer elected officials compared to appointed officials on those transportation authorities boards. So this table essentially just shows the elected officials on each column, or each transportation authority, or each column compared to the TPO board membership. So you can see, for example, for HART, there is complete overlap with the current Hillsborough County representatives as are on the TPO board. So we would look to either the representatives from Tampa or Temple Terrace to fill that spot. And then for the Expressway, Commissioner Hagan, Port Authority, Mayor Castor, and for Airport Authority, Commissioner White. Next slide, please. The second option for your consideration could be, instead of elected officials from those transportation authorities, be the appointed officials. So same rules apply, but there are more appointed officials on each of the boards, transportation authorities boards, which might have some operational efficiencies because there'd be more staff or more individuals to serve. This satisfies the issue with the government in the sunshine law because that would result in all elected or appointed officials on the TPO board, but it doesn't as well address the issue of having representative population representation. And then the last item that we have for your consideration, next slide please, is just to retain the existing membership apportionment. State statute just requires that MPOs evaluate the membership apportionment, but does not require that it be changed. So this is a compliant and reasonable option if that is the board's decision. Next slide, please. So here's a quick summary table and how each of the options perform against the criteria that we laid out earlier. Option 1 of having all elected officials on the board and elected officials on the Transportation Agencies Board represent them on the TPO board best overall meets the criteria laid out. Option 2 does as well, but again, less so for the representation of population. And then option 3 doesn't perform as well, but again, is a compliant option. Next slide, please. I'd like to kick it over to MPO counsel, Mr. Clark, to just further describe why the government in the Sunshine Law is an issue.
Yes, good morning again. In discussing this with staff, this issue had come up primarily because members of this board, and honestly as well, another complicating factor is members of elected bodies, county commissioners and members of city councils, rely on the expertise of staff directors from agencies such as HART and THEA and other agencies. The complication that the Sunshine Law creates is as members of the same board, it creates sort of the inability to communicate with those staff directors outside of the context of a notice being like this one. And sort of an added layer to that is there can be issues that come before this board, but also come before, for instance, the Board of County Commissioners or city councils. And in that instance where an elected official would generally have the ability to interact with the staff director on this issue, because they're also part of this board, it creates it basically makes that a complication. The only ability to communicate about those issues would be here in this setting at a notice meeting, because you can't have meetings between board members of the same board about an issue that is coming before or may come before this board outside the context of a notice sunshine meeting. So that's all. Thank you.
Well, does that conclude? Okay. So this is a serious issue because it does affect how we go forward. And I just, before I open it up to board comment, want to say at the outset that I'm very conflicted on this issue. And here's why. And I'll use myself as an example. I sit on the Port Authority. Mr. Klug and I interact in exactly the way that Cameron Clark is raising the issue about, the way that HART board members do with Ms. LeGrand or any of us do that sit on boards that are represented here. It's definitely an issue. I know in our case, if it's something that's going to come up in front of the MPO, it's just not something that we talk about. We sort of leave that off. But here's the problem. The problem is I believe that if you replace the staff expertise on this board with gubernatorial appointee board members or other board members of these organizations, they do not have, they can't have the same level of expertise about what the agency's objectives are as the staff do. They're the ones that brief the board members about what's going on, not the other way around. And in terms of the elected officials, I see it as unworkable to do that because we're going to run out of people. I don't think it's feasible to force the mayor to come here because she's the only person in town that's available to serve on the MPO to represent the port. And I think we're going to literally run out of people if we do it that way. So I'm interested to hear the other board members' views on this, but I think that the practical considerations of this may need to outweigh what in all of our best case scenarios might work. I think the practical circumstances might dictate leaving it as it is. But for those that would like, I see I had Commissioner Overman first, then Ms. Evans, then Ms. LeGrand, and we'll just keep going.
Well, and thank you for calling on me first, because I do have the slide that showed the alternatives, if you don't mind, please. If you could bring that back up, that showed the three different alternatives, that would be helpful. I think there is a way to solve this problem and not lose our expertise. Historically, there has been the need for elected officials to be held accountable for the decision and the policies we make at this board. And while that is doable while we're here, as you alluded, Commissioner Cohen, that we do need to work with our partners that are in the agencies associated with that with transportation. It is critically important that we do not find ourselves running afoul of sunshine. I think one of the ways to solve that, if you'll go back to the one slide just before this one, I believe, that describes the different makeups. One more. That one. If you could use that as an example. If all county commissioners, if all 7 commissioners were actually on the board, and given that 5 are on the TPO and 4 are on HART, the other 3 boards that are related to these agencies have representation of a commissioner appointed to those boards. If the commissioner appointed to those boards were actually the voting representative on the TPO, and we would not lose the agency, we would still have the advisory agency of these executives on those various different boards. For example, I'm going to use Mr. Klug as an example. Currently, Commissioner Cohen, you sit on that board. And while you will also sit on this board. When the Board of County Commission appoints boards, we would have to assure that maybe whomever does not serve on the TPO or HART, i.e. end up being here, be eligible to serve on the other 3 boards. We would always have an elected official sitting on this board. And we would not lose the expertise of the various important agency partners. They would still be an advisory role, but they might not have a voting role. Because, as you said, you get briefed by the port. You have to be able to speak with Mr. Klug and as his executive position at the port, and still have a good understanding of what the port needs to address in our transportation needs. But because of sunshine violations, you can only do that at a board meeting. But you represent the port on this board as well as the BOCC. And so by having all 7 members, whether it be through the TPO appointees or whether it be through the 3 boards that support this organization, we would still have representation and an elected official actually on the board. And that would still give us better opportunities to partner with the airport, the port, and THEA, because the board member would be able to have a more robust conversation about how to represent their vote or their position on the TPO board. And I recognize we oftentimes have difficulty wearing 2 hats, but I wear 12. So I understand. It is not easy. But it does, I think, give an opportunity to have elected officials be held accountable for the votes that they have at this place. And transportation is a core part of our responsibilities as a county. So I'll stop there.
Okay. Ms. Evans, and then Ms. LeGrand, and then Commissioner Smith online, and then Councilwoman Hurtak.
Thank you. Our board opposes this. We have a very small board that they're volunteers, with the exception of the mayor and our county commissioner. And Commissioner Cohen, as you pointed out, the mayor can't be representing everybody sitting around this table. And we have some concerns about the county commission representative as well, representing our interests over the county commission's interest. You all have very limited time, and we see that happening even currently. Is that the time constraints that our elected officials can give to us are very different. And as far as our other board members go, they have commitments beyond, sitting in public meetings for multiple hours a month. And we understand that there are problems, that there have been some issues with certain boards that doesn't stop those boards from appointing a board member to represent them here, but to blanketly take off all staff and put that on boards, especially one as small as ours that only has 5 members, we do not feel is in the best interest of this community. Because again, we know, we want to be part of these conversations because we know what's happening in around us, and we care. You know, one of the reasons that we love being on this board is that we care about what happens to our passengers and our employees, and we have a duty to protect that, and we want to make sure that that is protected. And so again, you know, Commissioner Overman, I completely understand where you're coming from. I think that this is, you know, it's a complicated issue, but our board is opposed to this. And again, small board, I know, you know, and our board is created by the legislature. So in order for us to expand our board, we have to go back to the legislature in a special act to add board members. And so, which we just recodified this year. So this is another 10 years before we'd be able to do that. So I think that for our position, we oppose that, and this is why.
Thank you. Ms. LeGrand.
So thank you. I have a couple of questions, so please bear with me. First and foremost, in preparation for this meeting, I did go back and look at the May 11 minutes for this discussion. And we had a robust discussion about this specific topic on May 11th. And there was a motion made by Commissioner Smith. It was seconded by Councilmember Maniscalco. And the motion, and I'll read it verbatim, says to have staff take another look at the TPO Apportionment Plan and reconsider a plan that might adjust the representation of local governments based on representation while retaining the agencies. And it was passed unanimously. I feel like we're having the same conversation and we're not moving forward from the discussion on May 11th, which was robust. And we had a lot of engagement about, you know, which direction we wanted to go. And it seemed from that motion, again, which was passed unanimously, the idea was that we would keep the agency staff representation and TPO staff would come back to us to look at how we may make some adjustments, again, reading from the motion, that may adjust the representation of local government. So first and foremost, I just wanted to put that out there, that it seems like we're not moving forward from that previous conversation. As I mentioned, I have a couple of comments and questions. So the next one is, I recognize that this is something that has to be addressed every 10 years. For my edification, since I have not been here for 10 years, has this been a problem in the past? So over the previous horizon period, have there been sunshine violations that have come, you know, before this body where you had to have conversations to resolve? And if not, I'm just curious on why we feel that it's going to become or pose a problem moving forward if we don't have a history of such. And then, you know, lastly, I would say as far as sunshine, I did have a conversation with our general counsel at Heart, Ms. Julia Mandel, and, you know, she gave me an example which I think is great to share in this environment. So within our agency at Heart, you know, sometimes we put together committees for procurement. So the committee will consist of multiple people, staff people from the organization, and that committee is governed under the sunshine. So outside of the procurement committee meeting, they're not to discuss what they're going to, you know, the conversation related to that specific body of work of the committee. However, after they get out of that committee meeting, those employees still engage with each other. It's not like they can't have a conversation and work on projects. They just can't work or discuss the specifics around that procurement. So I use that as an example here, which again, that's an example from Julia Mandel. But I believe that, and Ms. Mandel also in her counsel to me, that the sunshine violation or ensuring that there isn't a violation should be the onus of the agency, not the TPO staff. From a Heart perspective, and I can only speak for Heart, TPO items come on our Heart board agenda. Our Heart board is represented by 14 board members. 2 positions are vacant, but they're not decisions that are made by 1 or 2 or even the board member that sits around this table. The direction that Heart goes is a direction that is voted on by the majority of our board members. So I do think that, you know, the conversation around violating sunshine, or that I, Adelie LeGrand, as a representative on this board, may violate the sunshine and talking to an individual board member is not an issue, because we have committees within Heart. And at our operations committee or whatever committee a conversation will fall around the TPO, we would have it in that forum, which is a public meeting, which is publicly noticed, and there would be no violation. So I just want to throw out again, I apologize for being long-winded, but I did take some time to really think about the implications here and did consult with General Counsel for HART to really understand if there are any concerns that we should be aware of, and we don't feel like from a HART perspective that we have those challenges. Thank you.
And Mr. Clark, I'd like you to address Ms. LeGrand's questions, because I think as our legal counsel, you're in the best position to do so. But I just want to tell you, as someone that's been on this board since 2011, off with some gaps, I'm not aware of any time that it's actually risen up as an issue. But Mr. Clark.
And my personal experience in terms of, you asked about the history of this coming up before with the TPO, formerly MPO. I can't speak to that part. I can say I can't think of it having come up since I've been here, but I came on here after the last reapportionment. So I don't know if this issue came up before. I do know, I've been advised that one of the reasons why DOT doesn't have a voting membership on the board anymore is because it's a regular issue for board members to need to speak to the staff director of DOT, the department secretary, about issues that are coming up, and it would create a problem. As far as, and I haven't spoken to Ms. Mandel about this, I know Julia very well, but in general terms, members of the same board can discuss issues with each other all the time. They just can't discuss issues that may come before their common board. That's the main issue. It doesn't mean they can't associate. And like I said, I think one of the complicating factors here is just that let's say HART has a transit project that they're talking about with both City Council, BOCC, and Ms. coming before the MPO board. The problem there is if the person communicating with the elected official is a member of this board and the elected official is also a member of this board, that means this issue could come up before this board. And therefore that conversation would need to take place in a sunshine setting. And like I said, the reason that's a complication is because HART doesn't have a voting member, obviously, on City Council or the BOCC, so there's no constraint there when it comes to elected officials communicating with staff directors in the context of city or county business. But it creates a bit more of a murky area when you have those members all part of the same board, and the issue that may come up could come up before all those bodies, but especially this one. This is the one that matters because you have so many members of this board, including those with expertise on these issues like staff directors.
Ms. LeGrand, yes, and then I'm going to go on to Commissioner Smith.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to respond to ensure that there's clarity. What I'm stating and what I'm sharing is that because of the structure of HART, specifically, I'm speaking specifically now for HART. I know this is not just an issue that impacts HART, but we have a committee structure. So we discuss items that need to be addressed by our committee and then our full board, which is all within the sunshine. Again, I do think that the onus should be on the individual agency to ensure that we do not violate the sunshine. And I'm happy to announce I am not the only executive level person who works at HART who has the capability to address and discuss issues. So I just want to put that out there as well.
Commissioner Smith?
Thank you. Mr. Clark said some of what I was going to say, so I'm done.
Okay. Thank you for that. Let me, Mr. Klug and Councilwoman Hurtak are both in the queue.
First?
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. So I just want to echo what Ms. LeGrand said. You're absolutely correct. You had good counsel on that. And so for Sunshine, is that anytime there's a meeting between two officials who are going to vote on something, or any matter may come before them for approval, has to be held in a public meeting. And it has to be noticed, and you have to have the right, public has a right to attend. You need to keep meeting minutes, agenda, et cetera. So those two officials could meet. They could meet, and they could notice the meeting that there's going to transpire. It doesn't mean that those two officials cannot meet as long as it's in a public forum. We've been very careful. The impetus is on the individual. He's subject to Sunshine to make sure they're compliant. Commissioner Cohen and I have never talked about the MPO or TPO other than at a board meeting. And so we make sure that we do that. It's our duty to comply with that. And as Ms. LeGrand said also, that staff, there's other members of our staff that can talk to other elected officials or other members of the TPO board. In fact, when it comes to most of our public construction or transportation projects, it's going to be our port engineer, our vice president of economic development, someone like that who's actually going to be talking to their officials. It's not going to be me in that case. So there's other ways to get around this. I think this is a bit of a ruse to say that sunshine is the reason for this apportionment. There may be other reasons behind this, but I don't think for sunshine there's ways to get around those sunshine impediments. And I don't think that's, like I said, it hasn't come up before, and it's theoretical. And I think this is just a reason to basically eliminate those transportation agencies. When it comes to our board members are businessmen and businesswomen, with the exception of the county commissioner and the mayor, and they don't have enough time really to do all the board meetings we have. We have board meetings, we have public workshops, and we have approvals of different types of matters that require board approval. It's difficult to get all our board members to attend those. I think it'd be difficult to get an appointed board member to attend these meetings on a regular basis. This does take a lot of time. And so also with the appointed expertise, they don't have the same expertise as we do when it comes to the transportation needs of the board. So that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilwoman Hurtak, and then I'm going to come back to you, Mr. Clark.
I thought about this. Similar to what a couple of other members have said, I'm curious why it has to be the directors on the board of these agencies, and why not someone they appoint so that we can still speak to the directors about different things. That's kind of my only comment.
Well, I'll let Mr. Clark answer that, and then I'll come to you.
Well, I was going to speak to echo Mr. Kluge's comments, which were directly correct. It's almost inverse to what you're stating, which is that it's not that members of this board can't interact with the agencies or the staff from the agencies. It's personal to the people who are either the voting member or their alternate can't be directly communicated with. But obviously, anyone, Ms. LeGrand could directly communicate with the county administrator because they're not part of this board. Likewise, elected officials could directly communicate with senior staff at HART or THEA or any of the agencies. It's personal to the members who are either the voting members of the board or the alternate members. So that's all. Thank you.
Mayor?
Thank you. As was stated at the last meeting, I think Hillsborough County is unique in the way that we're structured with our transportation authorities. We're different than the rest of the state and how that works. And I think this structure is in the best interest of meeting the needs of our citizens. I think it's important to have representation and a vote from these transportation authorities because they're going to be the best at advocating for themselves. I'm in favor of leaving it up to them on how best to represent their agencies and partner with us. I don't think we should dictate that it needs to be an elected official. I think there's great reasons for having them here. Again, as was pointed out previously, while it's important to have elected officials and appointed board members, they're just not going to be in the minutia detail as strongly as staff is, and they're not going to be able to necessarily advocate as strongly as staff is in some instances. I think it's also important for the continuity of the agencies. The elected officials come and go in a short time frame, and these projects, some of them are decades long. And to be able to see that through, I think it's important to have these agencies represented the way that they are. So I'm in favor of the status quo and allowing them to determine how best to work with this TPO.
And I believe Commissioner Kemp, you wanted to be recognized.
Thank you. Yes, we've had, I think, robust discussion multiple times about this. And I've listened to all that's been stated. I've also, I guess I'm in my 6th year here on the TPO, and have watched the TPO now for probably like 30 years and been involved as a citizen. I have been very strongly supporting having elected members as much as possible of our TPO, and we saw the state graph before, or the graph that showed some 13 or 14 other TPOs, us being the most underrepresented in terms of elected officials who are, and I appreciate and think that the expertise is extremely important, and that's kind of why I am where I am with this. But I also think that it's impossible for the agencies to possibly know and be responsive to the public, which is what we are hear about, and also not accountable to the public in terms of the voting. I looked at this, and if we, I hadn't even thought of this part of it before, quite frankly, but I've always thought it was strange that we have 5 county commissioners and positions and not 7, but I've always thought every topic that the TPO discusses should really be something. It almost seems like it should be an agenda item on the county commission. I always think it's odd, the disconnect between that. I think it would be important to have the entire BOCC as part of this group because we are representing the entire county and from different spaces and places in the county, and here in a unique way that I can guarantee you are not heard elsewhere in terms of the really huge issues. I also feel as though I'm on the HART board. I've been on the port. I'm familiar, obviously, with the issues transportation-wise of the other agencies, but I feel first and foremost, whether as a HART board member, in fact, chair of HART, that my obligation is, I just don't see it as being separate from representing and doing what's best for the common good of Hillsborough County representatives that elected me countywide in terms of the transit system that we build here in Hillsborough County. When I think about if it were 7 BOCC members, right now we have 3 city council members, 10. We have 1 school board member elected, and then we have Temple Terrace and Plant City. So we have, there are 13. That would be an uneven number, which is something that we've looked at having. I would like to see that. I very much value and think the expertise that's brought to this board by the other entities. And I do think that those other entities can bring those issues forward, and we hear from them in terms of the transportation system at our BOCC and at this TPO. This would be working in the best interest of everyone. I would like to keep the TPO with the membership it has, but that the voting membership is the 13 elected officials. And we can have the expertise as part of the conversation information. I think that is extremely important and brings another element, but that is what I'll make a first move at a motion to move the board in that direction.
All right, I'm not hearing a second, and I believe
Second.
Okay, there's a second from Commissioner Smith, but as a point of order, Mr. Clark, I believe that this is the motion we voted on in our last meeting. That we're just repeating what we did at the last meeting. And then we can do that again, but I'd like to know procedurally, I mean, this is exactly what we voted on the last time. Commissioner Overman, you're recognized, but I'd really like to get some guidance from the attorney before we have board discussion of the motion. Okay. Okay. Mr. Clark's going to join us from the podium.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I believe that's correct. I'd have to look at the minutes to see the precise language of the motion, but I believe that's the same motion as before. There was no motion for reconsideration made at that meeting, so this would be revoting on an issue that was previously considered. have to think for a moment about, so you have a motion and a second for discussion. I think that one of the issues that's coming up is at this point, there's not been any final vote on how the board, or if the board's going to be reapportioned. The whole issue is still up in the air. So you have a failed vote, assuming it was the exact same language, I'll have to double check that, of what to move forward with. But at this point, there's nothing to take its place because there has been no final vote taken on how the board wants to reapportion if it chooses to do so. I'd have to check the language as far as whether it's
my
exact, but it
question,
sounds
I
the
think,
same.
at this point is that my understanding is that for a motion to reconsideration to be on the floor, it has to be made by a party that was in the majority in the last vote.
And under Robert's rules, it actually has to be at the same meeting. So this would be essentially the same motion at a subsequent meeting, so it wouldn't technically qualify for motion for reconsideration. There's another option on that. I have to look at it really quickly, but for purposes of discussion, I think one of the issues that's before you is there has been no final determination of this issue because at the last meeting, it was determined to reevaluate the issues that were discussed and come back to a subsequent meeting, which was happening now.
And to Ms. LeGrand's earlier point, the motion that was unanimously voted on last time directed the reconsideration to be elected official representation on the board. I interpreted that to mean the number of, say, BOCC members that would be on the TPO, the number of city council members that would be on it, et cetera, but that the issue of elected officials versus staff versus representatives of the agencies had been settled. So that's what I'm trying to figure out here.
Okay. As far as I know that the issue, as it was discussed last time, had to do with that very conflict, maintaining present formation versus removing the staff directors or maintaining them as non-voting members, which other MPOs do with some of their staff directors, versus increasing population proportion. I believe at the last meeting it was the idea of 7 county commissioners was discussed because of population growth in the county since the last census. But I don't believe there was a final determination made on that issue, and it was brought back for discussion today. So I think you can take up most any issue at this time because in the end, the board has to ultimately have a recommendation to go forward with.
So, Commissioner Overman.
Okay, so I'd actually like to offer a substitute motion. I appreciate having our port boards, our airport, and Thea on as voting members, or having a board of county commissioner member actually act on behalf of those boards in the event that they become an advisory board. But I have one question before I make a motion. Is there any reason that we couldn't keep the board the way it is and add 2 Board of County Commission members, still have our apportionment work, and that would preclude us in terms of a limit of the number of people on the board? Is there anything that would prohibit us from doing that?
From what you're describing to me, I'd say that sounds okay, that there is a maximum number of MPO members under state statute, but that number is 25, so you've got room to grow.
And so we have room to grow, and we have room to actually make sure we have consistency when the Board of County Commission is making a recommendation on our tip and other things by having all of the Board of County Commission members, where our county has grown to a level that it would be sufficient to have all 7 members be on the board. And it would address the issue associated with the airport, Thea, and the port still be having a vote in that conversation. And then actually you would have 2 votes, because then you would have a commissioner on as well as your executive director on the TPO. So I'm going to make a substitute motion that we expand the membership, keep the voting membership as it stands as we have it now, but expand the membership to include all 7 Board of County Commission members for Hillsborough County. And that's my motion.
Do I hear a second? I'll second. Okay, we have a second from Councilwoman Hurtak. Mayor?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the sentiment there, but you know, the other members have every opportunity to participate in the meeting and get the information that they need. And I feel like expanding the number of votes here from the elected bodies just puts this board in a position to have this come back up again and to have the support to make the changes that have been asked for here previously to remove the voting membership for the transportation authorities. So I would prefer to keep it with the status quo and just remind everybody too that we have 70% representation from elected officials on the board, so it's not insignificant in what we have in representation. We also have other boards, for example, the Transportation Development Council, where there are more non-elected folks that are on that board than there are elected folks. So we understand the importance of that board, having folks from industry representing it. Again, it's appointed by the board, the BOCC, but nevertheless, that's a board that also has folks that are not elected officials participating in having votes.
Just for clarification, Mr. Clark or Ms. Alden, once we've made a change to the apportionment of this board, we are precluded from doing so for another 10 years, or it can be brought up at any time?
No, not necessarily. It's required to be done every 10 years after each census. However, there can be changes made between censuses. We actually did that when we added the school board back in 2016, Beth, something like that, 2015, 2016. So there is now, the route that takes depends on whether
there's a significant process involved with that.
Yes, and the route that it takes depends on whether it's determined to be a significant change to the board or not. Adding the school board was not a significant change, so it was relatively, it took time, but it wasn't an extended period of time. If it's determined it's a substantial change, like population growth changes, those won't be determined except by the census. Okay. But if there's a significant change, there is a process that could last potentially several years to get to that point.
All right. Is there any other discussion? Mr. Klug.
Yeah, I just want to mention that we're a creature of statute. There's a statute, it's 339.175, and it specifically deals with voting membership. And it says in there, as we're talking about, the voting membership of MPO shall consist of at least 5, but not more than 25 apportion members, the exact number determined by equitable geographic population ratio based upon agreement amongst the affected parties. It also says that the voting membership may include a member of a statutory authorized planning board, an official, an agency that operates and administers a major mode of transportation, or an official of Space Florida. And the reason why it's in there, because Space Florida is not around the state, it's only one location in the state, but that's important. Our port and our airport are different than other parts of the state. We're not departments of the county like they are in Miami, in Manatee, in Everglades, in Broward County. Those are separate departments of those counties, and so that they are representing those cases. That is provisions in there that allow a situation like we have, where we're a major mode of transportation. Our district is the entire county. The port district's all of Hillsborough County. It's not just the area that you see in the waterfront. So that's the reason why it's in the statute. And so I think we have to be consistent with the statute. The statute goes on to say that county commissioners shall compose of at least 20% of the MPO membership if an official of an agency that operates a major mode of transportation has been appointed to the MPO. So we have 70% or more participation. So I think we meet these requirements, but I think we need to be consistent and stay within the confines of the statute.
Yes, Commissioner Kemp.
Just a point of clarification, since it's been said several times, but I do believe it's 63% of representation elected that we have, just to clarify. One of the lowest that I saw anywhere by far. Also, we have a very unique county setup. We have one of the largest unincorporated areas of any county in the nation. There are 1 million people in there. I call it the city of unincorporated Hillsborough County. And it's, it makes us, it makes us very unique. And I'll just say, when Mr. Klug read that out, it said may. It said you may have these. Of course we may. And we're unique in that we do have them, and I think that is fine to have on this board again. I think the voting should belong to those who represent, and the expertise that comes from the other agencies that are within transportation, I think is something valuable. It is, we had some discussion about how these boards are these very small boards for the agencies. It wouldn't make sense to me at all to have yet another additional board member on who doesn't bring the expertise or the voting representation. That's what having those board members on does. But I'll just say I feel strongly that it would be bring us the best of both worlds to have a board consisting of as it is now with the full BOCC, have the best representation in terms of the citizens of Hillsborough County and bring in the expertise of the agencies as well, but have the representation be the voting, those who do represent and are accountable to the public.
Commissioner Smith, you're recognized, and I'm sorry, there's others too. Go ahead, Commissioner Smith.
Thank you. And I like this motion very much, Commissioner Overman, and I will be supporting it. I do think it's the best compromise. I think it is, these are important decisions of prioritizing transportation matters and spending that is a huge issue in our constituency, in our citizens. And the more voice we can give them through the elected representation, the better. The point of the MPOs, TPOs, the reason they were created was to have local input, local voice, local control of the citizens on these spending decisions and funding of major road and transportation projects. We're in a position now where this is a paramount concern of our citizens. And so if we're not able to bring more representation in through the boards that we already have, if we're not able to change the mix, and we're not, given that the voting members we currently have are not going to agree to that, then I think the next best thing is to add more electeds from the county commission. I also feel like this would help make our process more effective and efficient, since the issues that we deal with here are of concern to all the board members. In our land use decisions, in our own funding and budgeting decisions, and they often have to be discussed twice if we're doing it here and there. So I very strongly support this motion on the floor and ask everybody else to support it as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. Commissioner Overman, I'll get to you, but I have Mr. Slater and Ms. LeGrand also in the queue, and we'll let you wrap up since it is your motion. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to offer a few points. First, THEA is in opposition to changes at this time for a variety of reasons. One is we have limited time of our board members. We have a small board. Secretary Gwynn is on our board, and so we have a limited number of options there in terms of being able to populate that. The expertise issue for us comes in really two layers. First is we come to this board not only with expertise of the issue, but we come with expertise over the course of a career working on similar issues. And so we have different perspectives that we can offer to this board for experiences that we may have had on transportation efforts in other parts of this country or other parts of the world that we could offer and add some value to that conversation. And we just wouldn't have the ability to brief a board member up on those years of experience in being able to address those issues. And then my final point that I'll make is, I would have to reaffirm our opposition to the new motion simply because it's just not something anybody's had a chance to digest yet. It wasn't in the materials, and it's just something new for us.
Thank you, Ms. LeGrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted I do have the minutes from the May meeting in my possession, and I just wanted to read something that Commissioner Cohen, you actually stated at the May 11th meeting. You stated here, and I'm going to read verbatim, it was brought up that if it is the intent that more elected officials be added, that would be a compromise framework. That could be circulated to local governments to see if there is support. So again, I ask, has that been done? It seems as though, again, from where I'm sitting, that the motion that was made, which was, and I'll read again, for staff to take another look at the TPO apportionment plan and reconsider a plan that might adjust the representation of local governments based on representation while retaining the agencies. But now we're talking about a plan that really doesn't retain the agency makeup. This was a motion that was made by Commissioner Smith, so on May 11th. So it's not the motion on the floor right now. So again, do we take, when we left out of that meeting on May 11th, does staff really look at a plan that allowed us to keep the agency representation the way it is currently and present to us a way forward that took into consideration the option of adding more elected officials? And was that circulated to local governments to see if they supported adding additional local officials? That's the question that I'm asking.
Ms. Alden?
Sure, thank you. So at the May meeting, we heard members bring up a desire for both additional representation from elected officials with the county commission and also elected officials from the city of Tampa. Both of those suggestions were made. There was a clear vote of this board to retain the seats as voting members for the transportation agencies. HART for many, many years was represented on this board by a HART board member, not by a staff person. And so I don't think it is unreasonable for us to bring back as a possible scenario for your consideration that the transportation agencies could be represented by board members, which might also address the desire expressed by some board members for additional elected official representation. For example, it was brought up also during the May board meeting that the city of Tampa has a number of activity centers in it, which might justify additional elected official representation beyond its population. That's not what is reflected in statute. Statute refers to population. So one way to look at that is elected officials representing the city of Tampa and serving with one of our major transportation modes, which obviously represents a number of business community interests and the activity centers within the city of Tampa, could possibly represent that interest of the city of Tampa on this board. We brought that forward for your discussion today. We're not under a deadline to produce a reapportionment plan. If you would like us to come back with another alternative, we can certainly do that.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Yes, you still have the floor.
Okay, so my question again, which I don't think was answered, and if it was, my apology for missing it. So was there anything circulated to local governments to see if there was support for adding more elected officials?
So we've discussed the process for the apportionment plan. The process would be for us to come to an agreement as a group on what our proposal is. We would then take it around to each of the individual local governments seeking a resolution of support. If we obtain resolutions of support from all 4 local governments, we would then submit the draft plan to the governor for approval.
I'm unsure if that response is what was the intent from the May meeting. It seemed as though, again, I'm just reading from the minutes and going based on my recollection, but it's been a couple of months, so I will say that, maybe some things are cloudy. But from what I'm reading, it seems as though what we were asking staff to do out of the May meeting was for staff to, I would say, assess if adding more local officials to this board would be supported by the local governments, so that at least from a TPO board member perspective, we would understand that, the other local governments are comfortable with us adding more elected officials, or was that not what the intent was?
If I could add a little point of clarification to this discussion, I think that the issue is that there are only there really are only 2 local governments that even under the new population, under the way that the population falls out, there really is not a whole lot of option. If you want to more correctly reflect the county's population, you have to add county commissioners. That's really your only option, because everybody else is already represented commensurate with what their population is. My understanding is that if we go with Commissioner Overman's motion, which is a compromise, because it leaves all of the agencies represented as is. It just simply adds 2 county commissioners to the mix. If we go with that, it will have to be ratified by the local governments and the governor in order to take effect. So without that consent, it's not going to go forward.
Right.
And by the way, I think they all have to agree to it, don't they? Everybody has to agree to it.
That's also in the minutes from the May meeting. But
Yeah.
again, my question is, have we posed this to the BOCC and asked if they are willing to have the other commissioners serve on this TPO?
Well, we have enough BOC, we have a quorum of the BOCC here
Now,
in this meeting.
right.
So it'll be revealed in the vote, I think, that question. But anyway, Commissioner Overman, if you want to go ahead and wrap it up, because.
Thank you. I would suggest as the chair of the BOCC that it's probably likely that we'll get there. But I did want to thank you, Commissioner Cohen, for clarifying. This does not remove anybody that's currently in voting capacity. All it does is bring 2 additional commissioners that are not on this board to the table. And the reason that it becomes important is because this board that develops strategy in the planning for how Hillsborough County spends its money and invests in this community. All 7 board members make those decisions at the Board of County Commission on a daily basis. What we have not had is local money to qualify for federal dollars to invest in Hillsborough County. We have only had, for the largest part, state money to invest in Hillsborough County because Hillsborough County Board of County Commission has not invested in the same way. I want to hold our elected officials accountable to that effect. And when we are asking our residents to vote on generating revenue to invest locally, I think it's critically important that all the elected officials that make the decision on how to spend money in Hillsborough County when it comes to transportation are in alignment with our long-range transportation plans. And so that's what we're asking our residents to do when voting on this. But also, I think it's also important, given the population is actually adequately represented, by adding 2 Board of County Commission members to this and allows the ratios to stay within a reason. We still don't have an odd number, though.
No, it would remain.
We would keep an odd number even by adding the 2, correct?
Oh.
Okay, so we would
no,
have an odd.
it would be an even number.
It would be an even number, so, maybe we need to add somebody else, but, but at the end of the day, it doesn't take away from the expertise that we have on this board today. It does add consistency in the methodology on making recommendations on our long-range transportation plan and how we fund it. So my motion stands as adding 2 Board of County Commission positions to the TPO in order to be able to address not only the population, but not to remove any of the other existing elected and or agency officials to the board. So that would not change those positions at the moment. So that's just to restate my motion.
And who seconded that motion? Councilwoman Hurtak. All right, we have a motion on the floor from, it's a substitute motion, but we have a motion on the floor from Commissioner Overman, seconded by Councilwoman Hurtak. Can we please have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes.
Commissioner Kemp?
Yes.
Commissioner Overman?
Yes.
Commissioner Myers?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Maniscalco?
Yes.
Councilmember Hurtak?
Yes.
Mayor Kilton?
No.
Gina Evans?
No.
Adelie LeGrand?
Yes.
Greg Slater?
No.
Charles Klug?
No, and I would say that I'd like to take this to our board and they haven't to consider this. And so that's why I'm voting no today.
This is Gina Evans. The same thing. I can't vote on something like this without taking it to our board first.
Similar issue for us.
Planning Commissioner Powell?
No.
The motion passes 7-5.
And let the record reflect that some of the agencies may be returning to us with comments related to this item at our subsequent meeting. It is actually 12 o'clock, and we do have considerable amount of work to get through. So I would like to, at this time, move back to the first action item, which was going to be a discussion and an addressing of the 275 issues that were brought up earlier by FDOT. And I believe, yes, thank you.
Justin Hall, FDOT District 7. I hope you don't mind. I may have to refer to my notes a little bit, all right? Because we're stepping out of the breadth of my technical experience a little bit on a few of these topics, but I'll do my best to get through them. First of all, I just want to note, we're sympathetic to the concerns of the community. In fact, we've had several meetings with the contractor to talk about the processes they're following. In fact, whenever we received the lab results from Ms. Savitz, we also sent it off for independent evaluation because we wanted to know what exactly, she had and what she was looking at from a level standpoint, everything. Because every lab produces reports slightly different. And so we really were trying to understand exactly what analysis she had done, like what type of analysis. So I'm going to kind of dive into I think there's two things for me to talk about. One is the actual sample, the actual dust. And then two is our construction procedure. So I'm going to kind of touch on both of those. So I'm going to work backwards. So currently the procedure is when we are working on the edge of a bridge deck, we saw cut down until we get to the rebar, and then we either jackhammer chisel to free the rebar up. And the reason why is much like you would with a Lego set, anything like that. You have to connect the slabs. And the reason why is this type of construction is called continuous slab construction. So you expose the old rebar, you bring in new rebar, and you either tie the rebar or you lap the rebar and then pour your new concrete. So this is a tried and true construction method. It's by the books. It's recommended and recognized by pretty much everybody that would say, hey, this is how you build a continuous bridge deck. So this is the way we build all of our bridges, and it's very similar to how we expand bridges throughout the district. We are using, based on feedback from the board, we did go back out to the CEI, and we have asked them to use water in situations where they weren't in the past. Even though this is above OSHA's requirements, we are having them use water. Did you get the photo by any chance? Okay, if not, it's all good. We do have a photo of, and I can provide it by email, of the CEI using water, or the contractor using water during demo operations at all of the overpasses. I did step out and had a conversation with the night inspector last night on MLK, so we roused him out of bed, and he said that they were using water during demolition. And I think the big thing here is there's still going to be dust. Like, it doesn't matter. And we had a long conversation about this when we met with our construction group. If you put the amount of water you would need to try and prevent dust, you would create another problem, which is now we would have water runoff from the bridge deck with material running off. So you've got this kind of balancing act, and the OSHA requirements only require a limited amount of water to damper the dust. So from a construction method, from construction quality, from all of that, I mean, we're now above and beyond what is required. So DOT has gone above what was asked and what's expected in the requirements. So I'll get into the toxicity, because I think this really is where I need to spend a little more time. So we reviewed the sample. Without getting into too much of the lab results, the test was consistent with a soil sample. So it was going out to, she took the sample off of one of our barricades. So she went out and actually collected a physical sample, had it in a bag, delivered it to a lab, and they tested that sample. And a sample like that is no different than the soil samples that we do, where we try to determine, and the county does, to determine what kind of contamination is in either the soil or the material that's present. And so that type of sample it is a mass. It's measured of mass. It's not measured of volume. So you got two different measurements. So if I take any of the standards, so the NIOSH standards, or if I go EPA standards, there's residential soil contamination target limits. They're called SCTLs, and that's based on a solid sample, which is what she had. And the acceptable residential use threshold for lead is 400 parts per million. So that just makes sure 400 parts per million. Her sample had 18 parts per million, so milligram over kilogram. So to give you an idea here, it's 400 is the acceptable, and hers was 18. Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you. So there, you can see there from a density standpoint, we're well below what would even be acceptable for residential. To give you an idea, what we were told is like common playground sand has a higher level of lead than the sample that she had. So in theory, as far as soil sample is concerned, that actually was a really clean soil sample. It had presence of silica, which we would expect based on the demolition of concrete. And based on our lab results pre-construction, we test the concrete, and there is not a level of lead in that concrete that would be of concern. There's no lead paint. The rebar was not coated rebar. So there's none of the general, the general places that you would see lead. And in addition to that, we test asbestos, everything, and this concrete's clear of all of that. So what's important to understand is she's got a measurement of 18 milligrams per kilogram that she's comparing to a volumetric, which would be over an 8-hour period. You put a air sampler out there, and it draws in all of the air over an 8-hour period, and then it yields a result that says there were this many milligrams per volume over an 8-hour period. And that would be the metric that she's comparing. So in essence, it's an apples to oranges. Now, like I said, I called our CEI. We got the inspector on the phone. We asked, is there more water? Is there a different type of water? Is there a different hose end? Is there something different that we can do? And so we're going to take a look at those options. But, you can see here, he's got a hose. He's spraying it right at the base of the jackhammer. There's water puddling on the concrete. There's water present during demolition. And this has been consistent since we made the commitment to this board that we would go above and beyond OSHA standards. So, at this point, I can take any questions and I'll do my best to answer them, but I'm not sure if you guys need anything else on that.
Commissioner Kemp?
How did you know?
I saw you reach for your button.
Thank you very much for giving us that information that we didn't have. I appreciate it. And I hadn't seen earlier, I didn't quite realize that you were on the agenda to do a report. So thank you for responding to that. Do you, and I assume, and the information is good, in terms of what Ms. Savage said when she was speaking, she said it was, and I guess this explanation is what you're trying to say with the volume, but she said that her analysis, and you said you got that report, showed it's 1 million times more toxic than allowed. Can you just address that specifically?
Yeah, so if there was 18 milligrams per, let me get the volumetric measurement because it's two different measurements. So if it was 18 milligrams per, gosh, I can't find it. That would be 1 million times the acceptable limit for EPA for airborne. And so that's if she would have done a volumetric analysis. So if they would have set up there and they would have set up for volumetric, and at the end of an 8-hour period, they came away with 18 milligrams per, yeah, we would have a problem. And that would be something we would, have some really serious things to deal with. But when you're talking about a quantity, when she's talking about a mass quantity, when you look at a mass quantity on a piece of material, it's, what is it, 1/40th of what would be even a reasonable residential, we're not even talking commercial industrial. This is residential levels. So this would be what would be acceptable at your house in the ground.
Okay, that was the only question I had. I just wanted to, I appreciate the clarification. One thing that wasn't mentioned, but I was a little surprised by, I don't know, she did say, she said this, but they didn't express a problem with it. I thought she said that they were jackhammering at 8:45 last night. And so I just wondered if you could speak to that.
Yes, I mean, that is correct. We send notices out when we're going to do night work. In fact, some of the areas, we've even had people giving us feedback that they prefer it at night versus the day, because we have some people have businesses in the area that they're doing recordings during the day. So, we kind of get both sides, and really what we choose to do on that is we try to take the path and allow the contractor to take the path that allows them to complete the job sooner rather than later. And so there is sometimes night work, and we do notice that night work. But we also are sympathetic to the concerns. We did have a citizen that reached out to us on Osborne that had a young child that had some concerns about timing of different work. And so we did move some of our construction work around, based on some of that feedback. So we're sympathetic to the concerns of the community, but at the same time, some of this work, there's just never really a good time. I mean, it's good for some people, but it's not good for others. But.
And is there an endpoint for this in terms of the jackhammering, in terms of these kinds of issues?
There is. I mean, so the way they started their work, they started on the east side and they worked their way up, and now they're working their way back down. And so if you look, based on the work they've already done the east side, and now they're working on the west side. So I would say as far as that type of work, those bridge structures for the widening, I don't have the schedule in front of me, but I would say that we're closer to the end than we are the beginning. And I would say that we're nearing the end just based on where they're at now. The fact that they're at MLK and they're kind of working their way.
And I know you don't have the schedule. Are we talking?
I apologize, yeah.
It's okay. A couple more months?
Are you familiar? I'm not, but we can follow up with that. I can get a schedule and send it out to the entire board. And also, I mean, we're open to if anybody would like to come out to the site and see the demolition and see, I mean, we'll take anybody out there from the board that would like to, take a field visit on the site.
And I know I went down when you were there in Tampa Heights, and that was helpful. I waited for a while and had some information, so I'd encourage that.
Yeah, we appreciated you coming out. So.
For anyone else, but thank you.
We have Commissioner Overman and then Mayor Kelton.
I'll try and keep this short. Yes, I came through. Actually, I tried to turn on MLK last night, but it was closed because of the work that was being done. So I'm very aware of how much noise and interesting work that was being done at the time. I'm going to ask you a question because I do live on the west side, and I hear all of it. And the jackhammering at 2 o'clock in the morning is a little annoying. 8:30 I can live with. 2 o'clock I can't. So you will hear from me, trust me. But that being said, what I'd like to know is what would it take, and do we have the capacity? I know we have the capacity for air measurement, air quality measurement. What I would like to ask, if it would be possible to see if we could recruit our Environmental Protection Agency that has air quality measurement, but it's on the other side of the downtown interchange. It's not in that general location. I do know they have the capacity for measuring on an on-site if possible. I would like to ask, in lieu of the motion that I made earlier to stop construction, would be to demand that FDOT contract with EPC for doing air quality measurements, to have a third party actually verify the information that is being suggested in this, or being basically indicated in this area, and come back to us within the next 30 days, if possible, to see if EPC could provide us with a objective third-party evaluation of the air quality in that area to address the residents' concerns.
And we can look into it. So when Ms. Savitz submitted her concerns to the EPC, that's actually who she submitted it to, and they sent it to us, basically deferred to us. And I will say that we looked at doing a volumetric at one point, and that requires a duration over, I don't know the number of hours. I don't think it's quite 8. I think it's actually a little longer than that. And our work a lot of times doesn't extend that long. And so the feedback we got was that, short of a material sample having a level of lead above a certain point, which our materials aren't anywhere near the level, that mathematically it would be almost impossible for you to reach the volumetric level. So if it's not present in the physical material, you're not introducing a new material, and you're not working in a confined space long enough that you wouldn't reach those levels. And I think one thing too to understand about the EPA level, which this had to be explained to me, was that is for workers, right? So that's a level based on direct exposure, like the guy holding the jackhammer, standing in the cloud of dust. You know, that would be the person that it's. Once you look at dissipation rates, what I've been told is that this isn't, because it's a silica material. What travels through the fallout, or you know, however you want to word it, you wouldn't even get a level that would be traceable. You'd almost have a result that most labs would consider, you know, indistinguishable. You know, they would just be air. You know, you would just be turning in a sample of air with some particulate in it. So we looked at doing that, because that falls under my group at the DOT, and we looked at it. We even reached out to one of our independent car contractors about doing it, and the feedback they gave us was, you're not going to get it. Like, you're just not going to get anything, and so no one's going to be happy because you're not going to have conclusive evidence one way or another. The lab's going to come back and say, hey, your test wasn't long enough, so your test really isn't valid. You know, so no one's going to feel like we really reached an end on this.
And I can appreciate that response. Yes, the worker is standing there working on it when they're working on it. But the people who live there 100% of the time. I mean, other than when maybe they go to work. But if they're at home, working at home, or have a baby at home, they're in the house in the neighborhood. So I don't know that it's having a contractor do it is what would assure the community that there is certainty that the air quality is not hazardous to their health. We have seen that EPC indicates that there are times where it is hazardous to our health, and I don't see that there would be, I don't think there's a lack of capacity of being able to do that, but I don't have that information to be sure.
Sure.
But what I would recommend is that if we do it, I would prefer to have it done by EPC.
Sounds good.
And over a period of time, and to be able to, to
We
address
comply
that
with the
issue.
EPC, so we have no problem with, if they would like to do that test, we can facilitate it.
So to be clear, you're not going to make a motion at this time?
Well, I see that Commissioner Smith, who
Well, and I also have Mayor Kilton in the queue as well.
Are in the queue. I'd leave it out there until we've had
Until
this
you've done.
conversation, and then I'll make a motion if need be.
Okay. Mayor Kilton, and then Commissioner Smith, I do see you, and go ahead.
Mr. Hall, just to make sure we're clear and I understand, you know, what the DOT's process is for evaluation of this on the front end. So you mentioned that you did testing of the material before it started to determine what the level of you know, toxins were at that time. Can you tell us a little bit about that process? Do you take multiple samples?
Oh, yeah.
How does that work to make sure that you and the contractor are comfortable with, you know, protecting everybody's safety?
So so as part of the NEPA process, we take, so the PD&E process, we take contamination samples as part of that process. So, you know, over a multi-year period, on Interstate 275, you know, I'm sure we took probably 30 to 40 samples on each side of the interstate, just based on the number of crossroads. I'm going to guess we're about in that number. And then again, before construction, we do the same thing. We pull soil samples, core samples, material samples, scrape samples. I mean, in fact, that's a lot of times why, you know, EPC and all will defer to us, because a lot of times we've done way more than what would normally be done. So we have done extensive testing on this material.
So you haven't done any, or I assume from your prior statements that you haven't done any ongoing testing because of the conclusions that were reached from that preliminary testing?
Correct. I mean, if there's nothing present before it exists, and if you're not introducing it, then it would be, you know, professionally, it would be, how would it be there? If it doesn't exist in the sample, if you're not applying any kind of material or using a process that would introduce the material, then why would you suspect that the material would be there in construction? And I mean, we pulled samples on all these bridges. You know, we know the era that the bridges were built. In fact, the greatest concern originally with the lab data was asbestos. That was actually what we were more concerned about. And then these all came back, you know, free of that material. So, you know, generally in that era of construction, that's the material you're looking for, unless the bridge was painted. Now, if the bridge was painted, you know, then, you know, you'd have a little more cause for concern and spend a little bit more time of checking the paint material, or if the rebar was coated. That would also be something that would be consistent with the introduction of lead. But in this scenario, the construction process used, the materials used, everything, there's no lead present, based on all of our initial testing, both, back when we did the PD&E and pre-construction. So, and we're not using anything to introduce that. So, it wouldn't make sense. We wouldn't normally do that. And that would be, what we're following right now is over OSHA standard. Like, we're above OSHA standard. And someone had asked about OSHA training, and, they are all OSHA trained. We have standard safety meetings with them. They have OSHA updates. And obviously those are open work sites, so they are inspected. So, this isn't a situation where, would have even been cause for concern from the DOT.
And you mentioned earlier that you had talked with the night monitor.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just elaborate a little bit more on what your policies and procedures are for holding contractors accountable to construction quality, safety, the additional requirements for the water? How do you make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do in accordance with the contract?
Yeah, so at all times during construction, the DOT contracts with, we call it CEI, Construction Engineering Inspection. So it's a separate third-party firm. They're not tied to the contractor. And their job is to be our 24/7 eyes and ears on the construction project. So they observe the construction behaviors, patterns, materials coming in and out. They also are the ones that sign off on whether steel rebar was tied down appropriately, whether concrete was applied at the right temperature specs. And so really they're the technical experts on the job at all times. And then in addition to that, which is kind of over and above, our district construction staff also, cycle through the project. So at any time, and Richard can test this because we went up and looked at a couple construction projects, at any time there's as many inspection staff and engineers on site as there are actual contractor staff. So, I think there could even be a conversation about that. But yeah, there's very little that can be done by the contractor without somebody, standing there visually watching it. And that's why this inspector, he pulled the overnight shift. So this would normally be his time to sleep. So,
Commissioner Smith?
Thank you. And I'm just, I appreciate where Commissioner Overman is going to have an independent entity provide a layer of confidence in the report, given the nature of the complaints coming from the community and the seriousness of the issue. So, but I'm wondering, let me ask the FDOT representative first. You said the citizen complaint went first to EPC and then they turned it over to you. I know that's standard practice. What I'm trying to wonder about is if there's a place we could have EPC come speak to us, either to this board, which would be a month from now, or at our EPC meeting, which would be August 18, if they have time to, put something together to talk to us about what their process is and what if they might review in any way what you're saying or add another layer of reassurance to us. So I'm just wondering if I can maybe call them after this meeting and see if they could do one or the other, depending on what the board's pleasure is here.
And
If
for
the board
everyone's
really wants
knowledge,
something,
Commissioner Smith is the
from
chair
them.
of the EPC.
Yeah.
Yeah, if the board really wants something from them, if this board wants to hear from them, that would be a month from now. But if we wanted, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, but if we wanted, to discuss it with them sooner, we could do that at the EPC meeting on August 18. If I can ask them to put that on the agenda.
Yeah, and just for edification too, the car contractor that we used is an EPC car contractor. So when I say we use the contractor, I'm not talking about the construction contractor. We use the contractor that's an EPC car contractor. which is what they do. We all, none of us have we may have lab staff or whatever, but we don't have the actual physical labor workforce to go out and collect samples and monitor samples. So we use the same car contractor, EPC car contractor, which is contamination or remediation. Sorry.
So I'm just wondering what the pleasure of this board would be.
Commissioner Smith, I think it's a great idea for you to bring it to the EPC, because we would then, as the EPC board, be able
Right.
to ask them to do something as a follow-up if we felt like it was necessary. I think we'd be empowered to do it there in a way that we're not empowered to do it here.
I'll do that.
Yeah. I would just concur and say I totally support that as well.
Yeah, I will withdraw my original thread of a motion, but with the idea that the Environmental Protection Commission Board will request that FDOT present the findings and request that EPC provide us with a solution that we could report back here. And that way we're addressing the community's concerns using the agency that oversees our environmental concerns.
And I think they may just present on their findings, because that's how it got to us, was they ruled that there was nothing, so they asked us for our concurrence. So I don't think we'd have to present. We can be present.
Yeah, and that meeting would be next week.
Yeah,
So
that's
we'd be able to do more quickly rather than next month.
And we can
So-
definitely talk about hours of construction. So.
Excellent, thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So we will follow that direction, and this will move on to the Environmental Protection Commission. Thank you for that, Commissioner Smith. We are going to be skipping the FDOT electric vehicle plan this morning. That has been postponed. The presenter on that had to leave. We are going to move on now to the FDOT District 7 Safety Program update. Ms. Alden?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Shu with FDOT has kindly agreed to come back to a future meeting to present that. And I can very briefly cover status report C, if you'd like.
That'd be fine.
Which is simply that the Transportation Disadvantaged Coordinating Board during the pandemic asked the board to set its quorum quite low, and now asks the board to reestablish it as a simple majority of the Transportation Disadvantaged Board members. This is a first reading of a bylaws change, which will be on your consent agenda next month, unless anyone has an objection.
I don't see any objections at this time.
Okay, and Commissioner Myers, who chairs the TD board, was in favor of that change. So I'll move on to my executive director's report. I did want to let you all know, as a follow-up to Bill Roberts' presentation about the CAC. We have been working with the CAC during the whole course of this past year on looking at how the CAC membership can be more representative of the demographic characteristics of this county's residents and the different geographic areas around this county. And I think that we are close to something that the sitting members can support, and we'll bring that back to you within the next 2 months. I would just ask for your patience in not nominating new members to the CAC during the next couple of months until we can bring back a proposal to you. And then my last item was to ask if you would like us to organize a field trip to see the very first bus rapid transit operating in its own lane in Tampa Bay now that it is going to be up and running. It is in St. Pete. Yes.
I'd like to see it.
Is that the Central Avenue project?
Yep, Central Avenue in St. Pete.
Can we do that in December, maybe? Or-
Yes,
yeah.
in cooler weather.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am, we will do that. Thank you so much.
All right. Is there anything additional for the good of the order, or are we ready to adjourn? Seeing no additional comments, we are adjourned.
That we understood the significance of this, and we, like for the past 50 plus years. Our partnership with Mosaic could not be stronger, and this just cements that for many